The painting arrived at the old estate on a fog-soaked morning in late October. No one knew who had sent it or why it bore the address of the abandoned house on the hill. The delivery man claimed it was already paid for, his hands trembling as he left it on the doorstep before vanishing down the road. The box was large, wrapped in black cloth, and sealed with red wax that looked disturbingly like dried blood. When the caretaker, Mr. Alcott, found it later that day, he hesitated. The estate had been empty for years, its halls echoing only with the moans of the wind. But curiosity outweighed fear, and with a trembling hand, he broke the seal and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a portrait of a woman, pale, elegant, and hauntingly real. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, and though the painting was clearly centuries old, the paint on her pupils seemed wet, alive. Mr. Alcott couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about her face, something sorrowful yet sinister. The nameplate at the bottom read, Lady Evelyn Blackwood, 1789. He didn't recognize the name, though he'd worked in the region for 40 years and knew most of its local legends. Still, he hung the painting in the grand hall, thinking it would give the place a touch of class. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, Alcott woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out of his room, calling out into the darkness. No reply, only the faint whisper of the wind. As he turned toward the grand hall, he froze. The painting was glowing. A faint shimmer surrounded the woman's figure, and her eyes, those gray, lifeless eyes, were now fixed directly on him. Not just in that usual painted way. No, he felt her stare. It was cold, deliberate, almost human. He took a step closer, raising the lantern. Her lips, he was sure of it, curved slightly upward. Not a smile of warmth, but of recognition. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the mansion soaked in silence. Mr. Alcott tried to convince himself that what he saw the night before was just a trick of the light, perhaps lightning or exhaustion. Yet, every time he walked through the grand hall, he felt her eyes following him. Not in the way all paintings seem to do, but as though she shifted her gaze when he moved. He decided to test it. He stood at one end of the hall, staring into her eyes for a full minute. Then, slowly, he walked across the room, never breaking his gaze. Her eyes followed him, smoothly, deliberately. He froze, a chill crawling up his spine. "It's impossible," he whispered. "It's paint, just paint." But later that afternoon, he noticed something even more disturbing. The woman's expression had changed, ever so slightly, her lips now parted, as if she were about to speak. Her eyes seemed glossier, like tears forming. He rubbed his own eyes, blinked, but the change remained. He covered the painting with a sheet, muttering, "Out of sight, out of mind." But that night, while he lay in bed, the wind carried a faint sound down the corridor. A voice, distant yet distinct. "Why did you hide me, Mr. Alcott?" He bolted upright, heart pounding, staring into the dark hallway outside his door. The voice came again, this time closer. "Look at me." The lantern by his bedside flickered, then went out completely, and in the pitch-black silence, he swore he could feel someone, or something, standing just beyond the door. For the next 3 days, Mr. Alcott refused to enter the hall. He stayed mostly in his small servants' quarters, eating little and keeping the lamps lit even during the day. But strange things began happening nonetheless. Objects moved slightly when he wasn't looking. Chairs angled differently, curtains swaying without breeze. One morning, he found muddy footprints on the stairs. Bare feet, small, delicate ones like a woman's. Finally, his fear turned into anger. "Enough!" he shouted one evening, storming into the hall. The sheet he'd thrown over the painting was gone. Lady Evelyn stared back at him again, her eyes glinting like wet glass. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. At that, the faintest whisper echoed from the frame, soft as breath. "Remember me." He stumbled backward, knocking over a table. "You're not real," he gasped. But the whisper grew stronger, turning into sobs. "Remember what he did to me." What they did. Before he could react, his lantern flickered, illuminating something new at the bottom of the painting. A faint red stain smeared along the edge of the frame, still wet. He froze in horror as the smell hit him. It wasn't paint. It was blood. Mr. Alcott's hands trembled as he reached toward the frame. The red smear looked fresh, thick, glistening under the flickering light. When he touched it, his fingers came away sticky. His breath caught in his throat. Blood. Real, warm blood. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stumbled back, staring at his stained hand. Then, the air in the hall changed. It grew heavy, suffocating. He could hear faint whispers seeping from the walls, dozens of voices overlapping, murmuring unintelligibly, like prayers or pleas. He spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. Still, the whispers surrounded him, rising and falling like waves. When he turned back toward the painting, the woman's expression had shifted again. Her eyes were filled with fury now, and her mouth curved into something between a snarl and a smile. From the corners of the canvas, thin red lines began to run down. More blood. They streaked across her painted dress, staining it dark crimson. Suddenly, the chandelier above him shook violently. Dust and glass rained down as the chains groaned. Mr. Alcott ran for the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The whispers became screams, high-pitched and desperate. He clutched his head, yelling, "Stop it! Stop it!" Then silence. A stillness so complete it made his ears ring. The chandelier stopped shaking. The painting looked normal again. The blood was gone. The eyes calm. It was as if nothing had happened. But when he turned to leave, he noticed a trail of bloody footprints, small, delicate, and fresh, leading up the staircase toward his bedroom. That night, Mr. Alcott sat awake in bed, every candle lit. He could hear faint creaks along the old wooden floor above him, footsteps that didn't belong to him. He counted each one, breath held. Then silence, followed by the faint sound of someone humming. A woman's voice, sweet, mournful. He gripped the edge of his blanket, trembling. "Who's there?" he whispered. The humming stopped instantly. For several seconds, there was nothing but the ticking of the clock on his nightstand. Then knock, knock, knock. 3 soft taps at his door. He froze. His voice barely escaped his throat. "Go away!" But the door slowly creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, extinguishing every candle. Moonlight spilled through the window, and in its glow stood a figure, tall, graceful, her hair cascading over her shoulders like black silk. He recognized the face immediately, Lady Evelyn. She was no longer trapped in the painting. Her eyes glistened, filled with sorrow and rage. "You shouldn't have covered me," she said softly, her voice echoing like it came from deep underwater. "Now they all know you're here." "Who?" he stammered. Her expression darkened. "The others. The ones buried beneath the house." Before he could react, shadows began to crawl across the walls. Dozens of them, writhing, whispering, reaching out. He screamed, backing against the wall, as ghostly hands clawed toward him. Lady Evelyn smiled faintly. "It's too late, Mr. Alcott. You've already joined us." Days passed, and no one saw Mr. Alcott again. The townsfolk assumed he had traveled back to London for business, but the caretaker knew better. Every night, lights flickered in the old manor, and faint cries echoed through the valley. Sometimes, the window of the main hall would glow faintly red, as if something alive pulsed behind it. Inside the house, dust began to move, not by the wind, but as if the house itself was breathing. The curtains swayed with invisible rhythm. The floors creaked with slow, deliberate pulses. The portrait of Lady Evelyn still hung in the hall, but now her image seemed slightly blurred. Her eyes appeared deeper, darker, and sometimes they blinked. One stormy night, the caretaker, Henry, decided to enter. He carried a lantern and whispered prayers under his breath. As he stepped into the grand hall, he immediately smelled iron, the thick scent of blood. His lantern light flickered across the painting. Evelyn's mouth was open now, twisted into a silent scream. He turned to leave, but the doors slammed shut behind him. The air grew freezing cold. From the walls came faint knocking, slow, rhythmic, like someone trapped inside, begging to be let out. The knocking became louder, then frantic. Henry dropped the lantern, and the room plunged into darkness. The last thing anyone heard from him was his scream, long, sharp, and then abruptly cut off. When dawn came, the front door of the manor stood wide open. The painting was clean again, but the woman inside it now had Henry's eyes. A month later, a young historian named Clara arrived in the village. She had heard rumors about the Alcott estate and its living painting. Her fascination with cursed art drove her to see it for herself. The villagers begged her not to go. "The house eats those who enter," they warned. But Clara didn't believe in ghosts. As she entered the manor, the stench of decay hit her like a wave. Every portrait in the hallway seemed to watch her, their painted eyes following her movements. She noticed faint blood stains on the floorboards, shaped like footprints leading toward the grand staircase. Her heartbeat quickened, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. She stood before Lady Evelyn's portrait. It was breathtakingly beautiful and deeply wrong. The woman's eyes looked too alive, her lips faintly curved as if holding a secret. Clara reached into her bag and took out her camera, wanting to document the legendary piece. The moment the flash went off, the lights in the house dimmed. A low groan echoed through the walls. Then, Clara's camera screen showed not just the painting, but a second figure standing behind her. A tall, shadowed woman with long black hair. Clara turned slowly, heart pounding. No one there. But when she looked back at the painting, Lady Evelyn was smiling wide. And now, the painted version of Clara stood beside her, frozen forever inside the frame. Years later, an art dealer named Victor Langdon purchased the abandoned Alcott estate, unaware of its history. He saw the painting as a masterpiece worth millions. When workers entered to clear the manor, several refused to touch the portrait, claiming it watched them. Victor laughed it off and had it moved to his London gallery. From the moment it was hung, strange things began to happen. Visitors reported cold drafts, whispers, and a faint humming sound that came from nowhere. One evening, the gallery's security cameras caught movement, Lady Evelyn's eyes shifting toward the lens. Victor dismissed it as lighting trickery until one night, while locking up, he heard soft footsteps echoing in the empty gallery. He turned to see a faint reflection in the glass, a woman's figure standing beside the painting. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he couldn't move. Then, in the reflection, her hand reached out, not from the glass, but from the frame itself. The next morning, the gallery was empty. The painting hung in its usual place. But now, two figures stood inside it, Lady Evelyn and Victor Langdon, frozen mid-scream. Months after Victor's disappearance, the gallery closed, and the painting was sold at auction to an anonymous buyer. The new owner, a reclusive baron named Edgar Wainwright, kept it hidden in his mansion outside Bristol. No one ever saw him again in public, but servants whispered that he spent hours locked in his study, talking to the portrait. Rumors spread that Lady Evelyn's whispers could be heard echoing through the hallways, that the painting's eyes glowed red when the moon was full. One maid claimed she saw a woman step out of the frame one night, glide silently down the corridor, and vanish into the walls. The next morning, that same maid was gone. Weeks passed, and Edgar's behavior grew more erratic. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and his journals filled with frantic notes. "She speaks my name now." One stormy night, a thunderclap shattered the silence. A neighbor, passing by, saw the mansion windows flashing with red light. The following morning, the servants found the study door locked from the inside. When the police forced it open, the room was empty, except for the painting. Lady Evelyn's hand was now resting on the shoulder of a man inside the frame. His eyes were wide with terror. The plaque beneath it read simply, "Edgar Wainwright, 1892. The painting resurfaced again in 1923, this time in a private collection in Paris. Art critics called it the most unsettling portrait in existence. Those who viewed it claimed to feel watched, even followed. Some reported nightmares of a pale woman whispering through cracked glass. One critic, Pierre Leclerc, wrote in his final column, "Her eyes follow me, even in my sleep." He was found dead 2 days later, his body cold, his face contorted in silent horror. The painting was missing from his studio, vanished without a trace. Decades later, the legend persisted. From London to Prague, from museums to hidden auctions, Lady Evelyn's portrait appeared and disappeared, always after a death. No one could keep it for long. Every owner eventually vanished or went mad. Today, the last known sighting was online. A blurry photo posted by an anonymous user showing the same portrait, hanging in a dimly lit room. The post read only, "It watches me too." Within hours, the account was deleted. But the image remains, floating across forums and dark web archives, always followed by strange comments like, "I saw her blink," and maybe, right now, as you read these words, her painted eyes are finding you too. They say the painting still exists, hidden somewhere, waiting for someone curious enough to find it. Some claim they've seen her eyes move through the glass. Others swear they heard her whisper their name. Maybe it's just a story, or maybe, every time you look at a painting, she's looking back. So, if you ever see a portrait of a pale woman with dark eyes and a faint smile, don't stare too long, because she never blinks. The rain poured relentlessly as Thomas Keller approached the gates of St. Miriam's Monastery. The once holy place stood deep in the Carpathian Mountains, shrouded in fog and forgotten by time. He had traveled from Vienna, sent by the church to investigate reports of unholy occurrences that the local villagers whispered about in terrified tones. The monastery, built in the 14th century, had long ceased to house any active order. Only one nun, Sister Agnes, was said to remain, a woman who had taken a vow of silence decades ago and never left the grounds. Thomas could feel the air shift as he entered the courtyard. The bells above the chapel tower had long since rusted, but faint echoes of their chime seemed to hum through the mist. Every step he took was heavy, his boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. When he reached the old wooden door, it opened before he could knock. A candlelight flickered from within, revealing a tall, veiled figure in black. Her hands were clasped tightly around a wooden rosary, the beads moving as if she prayed without sound. Thomas greeted her, but she said nothing, only tilted her head slightly and motioned for him to follow. The air inside smelled of wax, decay, and something metallic, something faintly like blood. As they walked through the dark hall, he saw murals of saints peeling off the walls, their painted eyes scratched away. A strange chill ran through him when he noticed that every depiction of Christ had its mouth covered by a smear of black paint. Sister Agnes led him to a small guest room, placed a candle by the bedside, and before leaving, turned to him. For a second, the candlelight revealed her face, pale, thin, and utterly expressionless. Her lips were sewn shut. That night, Thomas could not sleep. The candle Sister Agnes had left burned low, its flame dancing weakly in the damp air. Every few minutes, the silence of the monastery was pierced by faint sounds. Not footsteps, but something softer, like fabric brushing against stone. He sat up in bed, listening closely. The sound seemed to move along the corridor, pausing outside his door, then fading away again. Curiosity overcame fear, and he lit the candle, stepping out into the hallway. The walls were lined with ancient wooden crosses, many of them turned upside down or broken. At the far end of the corridor, he noticed a door slightly ajar. From it came a low, rhythmic whispering. He moved closer, heart pounding, and peeked through the gap. Inside was the chapel. The pews were covered in dust, and yet, in the center, a group of nuns in black habits were kneeling in prayer, or so he thought. Their heads were bowed, their bodies swaying, but when he whispered a soft hello, none moved. He pushed the door open. The air was freezing cold. As he stepped inside, he saw the truth. They were not alive. The nuns were wax figures, their faces eerily lifelike, eyes closed, lips sewn shut just like Sister Agnes. Some were cracked, with wax melted down their cheeks like tears. And behind the altar stood a tall cross, but instead of Christ, it held the burned remains of a nun nailed to the wood. Thomas stumbled back, choking on his breath. Then, faintly, a whisper came from behind him, right by his ear. Silence must be kept. He spun around. No one was there, only the flicker of his candle, trembling violently. By morning, Thomas found Sister Agnes waiting at his door. She handed him a tray with bread and water, then gestured for him to follow. They walked through winding hallways until they reached a large iron door, sealed with wax and marked with strange sigils. When Thomas pointed at it, Sister Agnes shook her head violently, a silent warning. He asked her what lay behind it, but she only tapped the cross around her neck and lowered her eyes. "Is this where the unholy began?" he muttered to himself. Her hands trembled, and she pointed toward the chapel, as if begging him to pray. After she left, Thomas examined the seal. The wax was centuries old, yet warm to the touch, as if freshly poured. Beneath the sigils, faint Latin words read, "Ut siliat demonium," that the demon may be silenced. That night, he dreamed of the iron door opening on its own. Behind it was not darkness, but a room full of mirrors, each reflecting Sister Agnes. Hundreds of her, all staring at him, their mouths moving beneath the stitches. He woke to the sound of metal scraping stone. From the corridor came a deep groaning noise, followed by a single whisper, "It's awake." By the third day, Thomas began to hear voices beneath the monastery floor. They rose from the cracks at night, chanting in Latin, mixed with crying. He placed his ear against the stone and swore he could hear nails scratching from below. When he mentioned it to Sister Agnes, she fell to her knees, clutching her rosary, shaking her head in terror. Later, Thomas found an old journal inside the library. The ink was faded, but one entry remained clear. The sisters tried to silence her, but her voice still echoes. She will never forgive them. That night, the whispering grew louder. The voices began to form words, calling his name. "Thomas, come below." He followed the sound to a loose stone slab near the chapel floor. Beneath it, he saw a staircase spiraling down into darkness. The moment he touched the first step, every candle in the monastery blew out at once. Holding a lantern, Thomas descended the narrow staircase. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the scent of iron and rot. At the bottom, he reached an ancient crypt, filled with coffins stacked along the walls. The carvings on them weren't names, they were warnings. In the center lay a coffin wrapped in chains. The wood pulsed faintly, like something inside was breathing. On its lid were etched the same words he'd seen before, "Ut siliat demonium." He leaned closer, noticing claw marks on the chains. Then a faint heartbeat, slow, steady. Suddenly, the lantern flickered, and a whisper came from inside the coffin. "Thomas, help me." He froze. The voice was not demonic. It was soft, female, desperate. He hesitated, then reached for the chains. At that exact moment, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed above him. The ground trembled, and Sister Agnes's muffled scream pierced the silence. Thomas ran up the stairs, the lantern swinging wildly. The monastery shook as if something massive moved beneath it. When he burst into the chapel, the air was thick with smoke. Sister Agnes was on the floor, clawing at her stitched mouth, blood seeping through the threads. She pointed toward the crypt stairs, eyes wide with horror. "It's out!" she gasped through the stitches. The sound barely human. Thomas rushed back down, but the coffin was open. The chains lay broken, twisted like vines. From the darkness, a trail of bloody footprints led deeper into the catacombs. He followed them, whispering prayers under his breath. The passages grew narrower, carved with old prayers and strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Suddenly, A shadow darted past him. A figure in a nun's habit, moving unnaturally fast. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing. The figure turned slowly. It was a nun, her face pale as bone, eyes hollow, lips torn apart by the stitches she had ripped open. She smiled, blood dripping down her chin. "Silence is a sin, Father," she hissed. Then she lunged. He stumbled backward, the lantern crashing to the floor and shattering. Darkness swallowed the corridor, broken only by the faint red glow from the symbols on the walls. He felt her cold hands grasp his neck, impossibly strong, bones cracking beneath her grip. "Forgive me," he gasped. She paused. For a moment, her face softened. Her eyes flickered with something human, sorrow. Then she whispered, "You should not have freed me." And just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The air fell still. Thomas collapsed, coughing blood. When he looked up, he saw the altar above him glowing faintly through the cracks in the ceiling. He dragged himself back up the stairs. Sister Agnes was gone, but on the chapel floor, written in blood, were the words, "She remembers." He realized then, the silence of the monastery wasn't holy. It was containment. Desperate to end the nightmare, Thomas entered the confessional booth. Perhaps God would hear him there. He knelt, crossing himself, and whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I have unleashed something I do not understand." From the other side, there was silence. Then, a voice, low, female and trembling. "Your sin is not releasing her, but silencing her." Thomas froze. He looked through the lattice. There was no one there. The air turned icy. The curtain fluttered though there was no wind. And suddenly, the voice came again, this time right behind him. "You took her voice. Now she takes yours." Pain exploded in his throat. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Blood filled his mouth. When he looked in the mirror opposite the booth, his lips were sewn shut. At dawn, the monastery bells rang for the first time in decades. The villagers below the hill watched in confusion. No one had lived there for years. Inside, the chapel doors burst open. Thomas staggered out, covered in blood, his lips sealed, eyes wide in silent horror. Behind him, the organ began to play on its own, a haunting melody that echoed across the valley. Sister Agnes stood at the altar, her stitches gone, her mouth open in a silent scream. And in that soundless cry, the stained glass windows shattered one by one, letting in the pale morning light. The villagers swore they saw two figures, a priest and a nun, walking into the forest beyond the monastery, hand in hand. But neither cast a shadow. Weeks passed. The village at the base of the hill began to change. Dogs barked at empty streets at night, and children woke screaming from dreams of a woman in black standing at their windows. The church bells rang at random hours, though no one was inside the monastery to ring them. Father Michael, the new priest sent to bless the area, arrived with holy water and skepticism. "The mind plays tricks," he told the frightened villagers. "There are no ghosts here." But that night, as he prayed in his quarters, he heard faint singing. A woman's voice, soft, mournful, echoing from the hills. He stepped outside, lantern trembling in his hand. The melody was beautiful, until he realized it was coming from the direction of the abandoned monastery. And worse, he recognized the words. It was a hymn forbidden by the church centuries ago, the one said to awaken the souls of the damned. When the last note faded, the wind stopped, and from the darkness of the forest he saw her, a nun, pale and still, holding a rosary made of teeth. Her lips were sewn, yet the song continued. By the next morning, the entire village was in panic. Chickens were found mutilated, their bones arranged in strange circular patterns. An old man swore he saw the nun floating above the fields before sunrise. Others whispered that the dead of the village graveyard had started to move. Father Michael gathered a group of men to go up the hill. They carried crosses, torches, and prayers on their lips. But the path to the monastery was no longer the same. The trees leaned inward, forming a tunnel of darkness, and whispers followed them as they walked, not from behind, but from inside their heads. When they reached the gate, the ground trembled. The church door stood open, glowing faintly with candlelight. Inside, someone had written across the altar in dried blood, "Silence is broken." One of the men screamed. A woman's figure was standing behind Father Michael. He turned, heart racing. But there was no one there, only the faint echo of a voice. "You came to listen. Now you will never stop hearing." That night, the village could not sleep. Every home, every corner, every wall echoed the same faint hymn, the one from the monastery. Even when people covered their ears, the sound came from within. Father Michael tried to perform an exorcism at dawn, but the moment he began the ritual, his Bible burst into flames. The words on the pages twisted into symbols, the same ones carved on the monastery walls. The people began to lose their minds. Mothers whispered to invisible children. Old men clawed at their ears until they bled. And from the church bell tower, a single note rang out, pure and long. It didn't stop. Hours passed. Still, the bell rang. At sunset, a young boy stumbled into the village square, trembling. "They're singing again," he said, his eyes blank. "Who?" asked Father Michael. The boy's lips moved, but another voice answered, deep, cold, and ancient. "The silent ones." Late that night, the church fell silent again. The caretaker, Father Michael, stayed behind to pray, hoping to cleanse the darkness that had taken Sister Helena years ago. But when he glanced at the mirror in the hallway, he froze. The surface rippled like black water, and from its depth, a pale hand pressed against the glass. Then another. The figure of a nun began to emerge, her face half burned, her eyes hollow yet glowing faintly. He whispered a prayer, trembling, "Lord, deliver us from evil." But the mirror answered with a whisper that wasn't his. "Too late, Father." The candles around him flickered violently and went out. When the other priests entered later, all they found was his rosary, melted into the floor, and a faint reflection of his terrified face, trapped forever inside the glass. Weeks later, a new nun arrived to serve the chapel, Sister Clara. She had heard the stories but refused to believe them. "Faith defeats fear," she said confidently. But faith trembled when she cleaned the old mirror and saw, for a second, another nun standing right behind her. Identical but with black eyes. Every night afterward, she heard whispers behind the glass, voices of prayer mixed with screams. The reflection began to move differently from her. Sometimes it smiled when she didn't. One night, Clara awoke to find the mirror glowing faintly. Her reflection turned toward her, though she hadn't moved, and whispered, "Join the choir." By morning, the bed was empty, and in the reflection, two nuns now stood side by side. One alive, one not. The church sent investigators, priests specialized in exorcism. They sealed the room and began prayers of cleansing. But the mirror vibrated, humming like a living creature. One priest screamed, clutching his head, shouting that something was crawling under his skin. The glass cracked, but instead of shattering, it bled. Thick, dark liquid dripped down, forming the shape of a cross upside down. One of them tried to destroy it with holy water. The liquid hissed and evaporated instantly, leaving words written across the surface. "Reflect and repent, or join." By dawn, all three priests were gone. Only the mirror remained, and now, faintly, three silhouettes could be seen inside it. Terrified, the bishop ordered the mirror removed and locked away in a monastery's vault. For years it remained sealed, until a curator from a religious museum requested to display it as a relic. Against warnings, it was shipped to Rome. On the first night of the exhibition, security cameras recorded something strange. Figures moving inside the reflection after closing time. The next morning, visitors found the hall empty, all mirrors in the room shattered, except one. And in that one, if you looked closely, you could still see faint traces of nuns' robes fluttering in endless black. The curse spread quietly. People who took photos near the mirror claimed they saw extra faces in the background, veiled, pale, and watching. One photographer disappeared after insisting on capturing the truth. His camera was found days later. Every photo showed the same figure standing behind him, closer in each shot. Experts examined the mirror but couldn't explain the cold air it emitted or the whispering voices recorded by audio devices. Some say the nun was never exorcised. She became the mirror itself. Today, the mirror of the nun is said to be lost, stolen from the museum. Some believe it was melted down. Others whisper it reappears wherever sin and guilt thrive. Videos online claim to show reflections moving on their own. Skeptics laugh until they start seeing her too. If you ever look into an old mirror and feel like someone else is breathing with you, don't look again. Because once she knows your reflection, she'll find you. Years later, a woman bought an antique mirror at an estate sale. She loved its ornate frame, unaware of its past. That night, her husband heard her speaking softly in the dark, facing the mirror. He thought she was praying, until he heard two voices. The next morning, she was gone. The mirror was cracked, and behind the glass, a faint outline of a nun's veil shimmered, smiling. In the quiet village of Hollowbrook, where the mist never lifted from the cobbled streets, lived an old woman named Agatha Moore. Her house stood at the very edge of the village, small, crooked, and wrapped in ivy so thick it looked like the forest was swallowing it whole. Every morning, smoke rose from her chimney, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread. To the villagers, she was a saint. Poor families knocked at her door for food, and Agatha never turned anyone away. She would smile, her wrinkled face glowing in the firelight, and whisper prayers as she handed them warm loaves and hearty stew. But none of them knew that behind her kindness hid a hunger far darker than poverty itself. For in her cellar, beneath the comforting smell of soup and herbs, were chains, bones, and a cauldron blackened by something that wasn't broth. Agatha's meals were a ritual, an offering to something ancient that had promised her youth once more. But to feed it, she needed flesh. And so, the old woman who fed the hungry was feeding something else too. As the weeks passed, whispers began spreading through Hollowbrook. Beggars came to Agatha's door but never seemed to be seen again. First, no one noticed. The poor often wandered, sometimes leaving in the night. But when Martha, a young mother of two, went to fetch stew for her sick child and never returned, unease began to crawl through the village. The priest spoke kindly, insisting she had gone to a distant town. Yet her children swore they heard her voice that night, calling faintly from the woods near Agatha's house. Agatha, as always, appeared heartbroken. She prayed loudly in church, her cracked voice trembling as she spoke of evil spirits and cursed lands. No one suspected her. How could they? She was their savior, the one who kept them from starvation. And yet, beneath her floorboards, Martha's shawl still lay soaked in blood. At night, Agatha would sit by her cauldron, watching the dark liquid bubble. Shadows danced on the walls, taking shapes that looked almost human. A whisper rose from the steam, ancient and cold. "Feed me again." Agatha nodded slowly. The next day, she baked more bread. One rainy evening, a stranger arrived in Hollowbrook. He wore a long, tattered coat and carried a small satchel that jingled with metal tools. His name was Elias Crow, a wandering healer, or so he claimed. He had the kind of eyes that seemed to see through lies, through souls even. The villagers welcomed him, desperate for medicine and hope. Agatha, however, did not. When he knocked on her door, she stood in silence, her pale eyes fixed on his reflection in the rain-smeared window. Elias smiled gently and said, "They tell me you care for the poor, madam. That's a rare kindness these days." Agatha's voice cracked like dry wood. "Kindness has a price, young man. You'd best remember that." He nodded slowly, sensing the unease in her tone. Still, she invited him in. Inside, her home smelled of rosemary and smoke, but beneath that sweetness lingered a faint stench of rot. Elias's eyes drifted toward a locked door near the hearth. "A root cellar?" he asked. Agatha's hand trembled slightly as she poured him tea. "Just where I keep old memories." That night, Elias stayed in the inn. He told the innkeeper that Agatha's eyes were not those of a kind soul. They were eyes of someone who'd bargained with something she shouldn't have. The innkeeper crossed himself and whispered, "Then God help us all." A week later came the Feast of the Moon, a night when the villagers gathered to celebrate the harvest. Agatha baked pies, stews, and loaves enough to feed everyone. The aroma filled the village square, drawing laughter and song. But Elias noticed something strange. The food shimmered faintly under the moonlight, as though dusted with silver. He watched as the poor devoured it hungrily. Hours later, their laughter turned to screams. One by one, they clutched their stomachs, collapsing in agony. Their veins turned black as if ink was spreading beneath their skin. Elias rushed to help, but Agatha's voice sliced through the chaos. "Don't interfere. They belong to me." Her frail body stood tall, her face illuminated by the blood-red moon. Around her feet, the dying villagers twitched and fell silent. Then, from the ground, shadows rose, shapes of hungry spirits feeding on the fallen. Elias stared in horror. He saw now that the old woman's reflection had no face at all. He fled into the woods as her laughter followed him, dry and hollow like dead leaves whispering in the wind. Elias returned at dawn, determined to uncover the truth. He crept into Agatha's house, the door creaking like a dying breath. The smell hit him first, a thick, sweet rot that clung to his throat. Down the stairs he went, candle trembling in hand. Beneath the house, he found a chamber carved from stone, walls lined with bones. At the center stood the black cauldron, bubbling though no fire burned beneath it. Around it lay the remains of those who'd vanished, their faces twisted in silent screams. Agatha's voice came from the shadows, calm and cold. "You shouldn't have come back, healer." She stepped forward, her skin stretched thin, her eyes burning with inhuman hunger. Elias lifted a silver cross, but it melted in his hand. "What are you?" he whispered. Agatha smiled. "The price of kindness, collected." The ground shook, and the cauldron's contents rose like smoke, forming faces that screamed in agony. Elias realized then, Agatha no longer served the creature. She was the creature. Elias returned that night, clutching a flask of holy water and a torch wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. He moved through the fog like a ghost himself, the air heavy with the scent of decay and the faint echoes of laughter from somewhere deep within the forest. The moon hung low and red, like a bleeding wound in the sky. When he reached Agatha's crooked house, he could see movement through the windows, shadows that swayed and twisted, though no one else should have been inside. He forced the door open and shouted her name. Silence answered him. The fire in the hearth burned blue, and on the walls hung strange symbols drawn in something dark and glistening. Beneath his feet, a dull thudding came from below, like the beating of a giant heart. Elias poured the holy water across the floor and threw the torch into the center of the room. The fire roared to life, devouring the wood and the symbols alike. For a moment it seemed to work. The whispers stopped, the air grew still. But then, from the flames, Agatha's voice rose, deep and echoing. "Fire cannot cleanse what feeds on the soul." The house groaned, the walls bleeding black sap. The floorboards split open, revealing dozens of pale, skeletal hands clawing from below. Elias stumbled back, choking on the smoke and screams. He fled again, but as he turned, he saw her standing in the fire, untouched, her eyes like burning coals. She smiled, and the flames bowed to her. Days passed, and the village grew silent. No one dared to visit Agatha's house, but Elias could not rest. In the church archives, he uncovered an old book bound in flayed leather, the Grimoire of Ashen Saints. Within its pages, he found her name written centuries ago. Agatha Moore, listed among the servants of the Devourer, a cult that had vanished after consuming entire villages in 1621. The cult believed that through acts of false charity, they could feed a being born of hunger itself. Elias realized the truth. Agatha had never been human for a very long time. She was the last remnant of that cult, a vessel for the creature that promised endless life through sacrifice. He turned the final page. A sketch stared back at him. Agatha, unchanged, standing beside her black cauldron. Beneath it was written in ink that looked like blood. When the last beggar is fed, the devourer shall walk again. Elias knew then what must be done. He had to starve the hunger she served. But to do that, he would have to destroy her vessel, her body. Armed with salt, iron, and the last few drops of holy water, Elias ventured once more to Agatha's house. The sky above Hollowbrook was bruised purple, thunder crawling like veins through the clouds. The house waited silent, watching. Inside, the air was colder than death. The cauldron still bubbled, but now it breathed, exhaling fog with each pulse. On the table lay pieces of half-eaten bread, and beside them, small bones. Elias whispered a prayer and drew a circle of salt. The moment he stepped inside it, the shadows shifted. Faces formed in the dark, mouths moving in silent screams. Agatha's voice came from the staircase, soft yet filled with malice. "You can't stop hunger, boy. It's older than God." She descended slowly, her figure warping, flesh dripping like wax. Her smile widened beyond human shape. Elias raised a blade of iron and shouted, "Then let it starve." He drove the blade through her heart. A scream shook the earth, high, shrill, endless. The cauldron cracked, spilling a flood of black fire that devoured the walls. Agatha fell, her body turning to ash. But from the ashes, something moved, something still alive. The ashes began to stir. At first, Elias thought it was just the wind. But then the black dust gathered, swirling upward, forming the outline of a human shape. From within it came whispers, thousands of voices, all begging, all crying, all starving. They weren't echoes. They were the souls Agatha had fed. And now, freed from her vessel, they had no body, no rest, only hunger. The walls of the house twisted and pulsed like veins. The symbols carved into the wood ignited with a red glow, forming a circle beneath Elias's feet. He tried to escape, but his legs felt heavy, sinking as if the floor were melting into tar. The air became thick, tasting of iron and rot. In front of him, the figure of Agatha began to reform. Taller, thinner, her face stretched into something monstrous. Her eyes were voids that devoured light. "You freed me," she said, her voice echoing like 1,000 mouths speaking at once. "Now they will feast." The floor cracked open, and from beneath rose the remnants of those she had killed. Spectral forms crawling on skeletal limbs, their mouths gaping wide. They reached for Elias, pulling him toward the cauldron that now glowed with blood-red fire. He fought, slashing with his iron blade, chanting the verses from the grimoire. Each word burned the air, each breath tore at his lungs. Then silence, a sudden stillness that pressed against his skull. Agatha stopped moving. The souls paused, hanging midair. Elias took one step forward and hurled the last of his holy water into the cauldron. The explosion that followed was like thunder inside the bones of the earth. The fire turned white, blinding, purifying, consuming everything it touched. Agatha screamed, her form unraveling like smoke in sunlight. The souls shrieked and scattered into light, dissolving one by one. The house collapsed in on itself, swallowed by the blinding radiance. And when the light faded, there was only silence, and Elias, unconscious among the ashes. When Elias awoke, dawn was breaking. The house was gone. Only scorched earth remained, the air still humming with faint energy. He staggered to his feet, every bone aching, his eyes burning from smoke. The forest was quiet again, almost peaceful. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something glinting among the ashes. A small piece of metal, Agatha's locket. Inside it was a photograph, impossibly old, showing a young woman holding a child. The woman's smile was kind, human. Elias felt a pang of pity. Perhaps once, long before the hunger, she had truly been someone good. He closed the locket and buried it beneath a stone. But as he walked away, he heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. A woman's voice, soft, almost gentle. "Kindness never dies. It only hungers." Elias froze. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. He turned, and for a moment, he thought he saw her standing among the trees, pale and still, her eyes watching him through the mist. That night, miles away, in another village, an old woman knocked on a stranger's door. Her smile was warm. Her basket smelled of bread. The following week, strange tales began to spread across the neighboring villages. People whispered about a kind old woman with a crooked back and cloudy eyes who had started visiting the poor again. She offered warm bread, stew, and a smile so gentle it could melt the hardest heart. No one knew her name, but the smell of herbs and ashes lingered wherever she went. In a small village called Bramble's End, a mother named Clara accepted the old woman's meal. Her children had been starving for days, and kindness seemed like salvation. The woman's bread was sweet, soft, almost glowing under the candlelight. But that night, the children began to scream. Their bellies swelled, their skin blistered, and before dawn, Clara's house was silent. By morning, the villagers found her rocking beside their bodies, murmuring nonsense, her eyes empty. In the corner of the room lay a basket of uneaten bread, and inside it, small black beetles writhing in the dough. Some said it was a curse. Others said the old woman was just a story. But those who smelled herbs and smoke at their windows began locking their doors tight at night. Rumors turned into fear, and fear became obsession. Priests were summoned, charms hung over doors, and fires burned all night to keep the dark away. Yet, one by one, more homes went silent. Livestock were found rotting in their pens. Wells turned foul. Children disappeared. A young priest named Father Rowan rode into Bramble's End after hearing the stories. He was brave, curious, too much for his own good. He questioned Clara, who now sat in the chapel's corner, muttering to herself. When he mentioned the old woman, her lips trembled and she whispered, "She said she feeds the hungry, and I was so hungry." That night, Father Rowan stayed in the chapel, candle in hand. Near midnight, he heard a knock, gentle, repetitive. He opened the door to find an old woman, her shawl soaked from the rain, holding a basket. "For the weary and the holy," she said kindly. By dawn, the chapel was aflame. When the villagers came running, they found nothing inside but charred wood and a smell of herbs and burnt flesh. By the end of that month, 5 villages had burned. Those who survived spoke of an old woman moving through the fog, her basket steaming, her voice like a hymn. Wherever she went, kindness preceded death. In one village, a blacksmith named Gareth refused her food, calling her a witch. That night, his forge exploded. The next morning, his body was found among the ashes, but his mouth was sewn shut with what looked like human hair. The people began to flee their homes, but some stayed, believing charity might protect them. A foolish mistake. One evening, an entire family of 7 was found at their dinner table, bowls untouched, faces twisted in terror. Their food had turned to ash in their hands. And in the silence of those dead towns, the same smell lingered, herbs, ash, and something faintly sweet. A man named Jonathan Crane, a scholar of folklore and forbidden texts, arrived to document the kind woman of the North. He had read Elias's writings from decades past and believed the spirit of Agatha Moore had returned. He carried charms, salt, and a vial of sanctified oil. The villagers called him mad, but desperation breeds faith. He spent his nights collecting testimony, trembling accounts of laughter at windows, of bread left on doorsteps, and of dreams filled with the smell of herbs. Jonathan soon realized the pattern. Every village Agatha visited lay near the river's path, the same one that once flowed beside her burned-down home. Something had tethered her spirit to its waters. He set out to find the ruins of that house, hoping to end what Elias began. Jonathan found it after 3 days of wandering, a hollow clearing surrounded by twisted trees. The ground was scorched, but beneath the ash, he found fragments of wood, nails, and a single stone hearth blackened with age. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and rot. He built a small camp beside the ruins and waited. As the sun fell, the forest grew unnaturally still. No wind, no sound, just a faint creaking, like breathing. The ground shifted beneath him. He stepped back, and something pale rose from the ashes. It was a hand, then another, and then, from beneath the earth, the bent figure of an old woman, her shawl in tatters, her face smiling wide. "Kindness must continue," she whispered. "And you, dear boy, look so hungry." As the bodies continued to pile up, fear consumed the hearts of everyone in the village. Families locked their doors long before nightfall, and the once lively town square became an empty echo of what it had been. People began whispering about curses and demons, convinced that the old woman was no ordinary human. Some claimed to see shadows moving inside her home long after she had gone to sleep. Others swore they could hear faint screams drifting through the cold night air. A small group of brave men decided to confront her once and for all, armed with torches and prayer books. They waited until sunset, then surrounded her house. But when they pushed the door open, the old woman was gone. In her place, the room was filled with rotting food and the smell of death. The men found a trapdoor beneath the kitchen floor, leading into darkness. What they saw below would scar them forever. Beneath the floor lay a narrow tunnel lit by flickering candles. The walls were lined with bones, human bones, and at the center stood a crude wooden altar covered with dried blood. On it lay charms made from hair, teeth, and tiny dolls resembling villagers. There were names carved into the wood, including that of every person who had died mysteriously over the past year. But the most chilling part was a large iron pot still warm to the touch, filled with a dark, sticky substance. It didn't take long for them to realize what it was: the remnants of her victims. The men fled in horror, their screams echoing through the tunnels. But one of them swore he heard laughter behind him, soft, wheezing, and unmistakably hers. The men told their story to the priest, who declared the place cursed and demanded it be burned to the ground. They gathered the villagers, and together they set the house ablaze. Flames rose high into the black sky, and for a moment, they felt the nightmare was finally over. But 3 nights later, one of the men who had entered the house was found dead in his bed, eyes wide open, mouth twisted in terror. Then another followed, and another. By the end of the week, all who had entered that cellar were gone. Only ashes and whispers remained. The priest ordered the ground sealed and blessed. Yet some say they still see the old woman's shadow wandering near the ruins, carrying a bowl, as if still searching for her next meal. Years passed, and the story became a legend whispered by parents to scare their children. The land where the house once stood was avoided by all. Even the bravest hunters refused to cross it. But strange things began happening again. Stray dogs disappearing, strange symbols appearing on doors, and people falling mysteriously ill after accepting food from strangers. It was as if her spirit had found new ways to feed. Some believed she had possessed another body, continuing her grim work. Others thought she had become something far worse, a hungry spirit, feeding on the fear she left behind. Today, the tale of the widow's feast remains one of the darkest legends in the region. Travelers are warned never to accept food from strangers in the surrounding villages, especially from elderly women living alone. Local folklore says that on cold nights, if you follow the scent of freshly baked bread through the fog, you might find her waiting, smiling kindly, ladling soup into a bowl. But if you take a single bite, your soul will never rest again. Her feast continues, unseen and eternal, feeding not just on flesh, but on the fear that never dies. They say the smell of her stew still lingers in the wind whenever someone walks near the ruins of her house. And sometimes, you can hear faint whispers calling your name, just before the night turns silent again. Evil doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes, it hides behind a smile and a bowl of warm soup. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror tales that blur the line between kindness and darkness. Lena had always loved exploring abandoned places, but nothing prepared her for the old mansion at the edge of Blackwell Forest. Locals warned her never to enter, claiming the house contained a room that reflects what doesn't belong to this world. She thought it was just another legend, until the night she stepped inside. The mansion was silent, untouched for decades. Dust hung in the air like frozen fog, and the smell of damp would fill every hallway. Lena moved carefully, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she documented everything for her urban exploration channel. But something felt wrong. Every sound echoed too clearly, as if the house itself was listening. At the end of the second floor, she found it. A door slightly open, and a cold breeze drifting out of it. The room inside was empty except for one thing: a massive mirror covering the entire wall, cracked in a spiderweb pattern yet reflecting perfectly. It felt impossibly heavy, ancient, and strangely warm to the touch. As Lena stepped closer, her reflection flickered, just for a second. She froze. She leaned in, breathing slowly. Her reflection stared back, until its eyes blinked a second too late. Her pulse spiked. She stepped back, but her reflection didn't. It stayed where it was, smiling, slowly, unnaturally, as if discovering a new expression it had never tried before. Then the reflection raised its hand. Lena did not, and with its fingertip, the reflection traced 3 words slowly across the inside of the mirror, glowing faintly on the glass. "I see you." That was the moment Lena realized the villagers weren't lying. Something lived inside the mirror room, and it had finally noticed her. Lena forced herself to look away from the mirror, her breath shaking as she backed toward the door. But the wooden frame slammed shut on its own, sealing her inside the room. Her heart jolted. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. It felt locked from the inside, as if the mirror itself controlled the door. Behind her, the glass began to hum. A faint vibration crawled through the floorboards, up her legs, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. The cracked lines in the mirror glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't match reality. She turned slowly, and the reflection was gone. Her own body still existed. She could feel her breath, her fingers trembling, but the mirror showed only the empty room behind her. No Lena, no shadow, only the widening smile of an unseen presence blooming across the reflective surface like a stain. A soft tapping sound echoed from behind the glass. Knuckles? Claws? She couldn't tell. Each tap grew louder, more violent, forming a pattern. Tap, 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 tap. A message. A call. Then a figure emerged inside the mirror, stepping forward from a depth that shouldn't exist. It wore Lena's shape, but not her expression. Its posture was twisted, its smile too wide, and its eyes too dark, deep pits instead of pupils. It reached its hand to the surface. The glass bent. It didn't crack. It stretched as if the mirror were made of liquid skin. Lena realized one horrifying truth. The reflection wasn't trapped inside. She was. The figure on the other side whispered, voice perfectly matching hers. "Switch with me." And the surface rippled, inviting her in. Lena stumbled backward, knocking over a wooden stool in her panic. The sound snapped the mirror creature's head toward her in a sharp, unnatural motion, like a bird fixating on prey. Its smile vanished, replaced by a look of ravenous hunger. The mirror began absorbing the light in the room. The air grew colder, heavy, thick enough to burn her lungs. Lena fumbled for her camera, raising it with shaking hands. Maybe if she documented it, if she recorded proof, then someone would believe what happened to her. If she survived. But when she aimed the camera at the mirror, the screen showed something she wasn't expecting. Herself standing still in the reflection. Except she wasn't holding the camera. And she wasn't alone. A tall, shadowed figure stood behind her mirrored self, one hand resting gently on the reflection's shoulder. His fingers were too long, jointed wrong, curling like blackened roots. The creature leaned toward her reflection's ear, whispering something silently. Lena couldn't hear it, but she felt it, like cold breath on her own neck. The reflection lifted its head and mouthed. "He's choosing." The mirror creature from earlier slammed both palms against the inside of the glass, cracking it further but not breaking through. The tall figure behind Lena's reflection nodded slowly, approvingly, like a puppeteer satisfied with his marionette. Lena's real body weakened, her knees shaking. She felt her thoughts blur, her memories dim, as if something was taking her, pulling her identity apart thread by thread. She dropped the camera. The sound echoed unnaturally long, repeating in a loop. Something whispered from the mirror's depths. "Only one of you gets to leave." Lena forced herself toward the window, desperate for air, light, anything. But when she tore the curtains open, her breath froze. The outside world was gone. Instead of the forest, the night sky, or the distant town lights, the window showed endless corridors of mirrors stretching into infinity. Each mirror reflected another angle of the room, except they were wrong. In one, she saw herself standing still, eyes black. In another, she saw herself bleeding. In a third, something tall dragged her body across the floor. Every mirror showed a different fate. She stumbled back, clutching her head as voices filled the room. Overlapping versions of her own voice screaming, begging, whispering secrets she never told anyone. The mirror behind her warped again, its surface bulging outward like a balloon ready to burst. Hands, too many hands, pressed against the glass from the inside. Lena screamed and ran to the door, pounding, clawing, kicking. The wood groaned but refused to open. The voices grew louder, merging into a single unified whisper. "Replace, replace, replace." The mirror creature stepped forward again, closer now, its features sharpening into something almost human, almost her. Its eyes locked with hers, and Lena felt her reflection pushing into her thoughts, copying her memories, her face, her very soul. Then the tall, shadowed figure appeared behind the creature, placing its hand on its head like a blessing. The room trembled. The creature opened its mouth, and Lena heard her own voice come out of it. "You don't belong here anymore." The glass stretched once more, and this time, the creature's foot emerged through the surface. The moment the creature's foot touched the wooden floor, the entire room shook violently. The temperature plummeted, frost crawling along the mirror frame like veins. Lena backed into a corner, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The creature fully emerged now, a perfect, distorted version of her. Its limbs were slightly too long, its smile too wide, its skin too pale as if drained of life. But the worst part carried her posture, her movements, her voice. It was becoming her. The tall shadow remained inside the mirror, watching like a proud parent. Its glowing eyes tracked Lena, analyzing her fear. The creature stepped closer, mimicking her trembling breaths, mocking her. "Lena," it whispered, "I've waited so long to be real." With each step it took, Lena felt herself fading, as if the creature's existence was consuming hers. Her heartbeat slowed, her muscles weakened, her vision blurred. It wasn't just copying her, it was replacing her. She crawled toward the fallen camera, clutching it like a lifeline. The creature knelt in front of her, tilting its head with curiosity. "You recorded enough," it said in her voice. "Let me finish your story." It reached toward her face, fingers stretching as if to peel her identity off her skin. Lena screamed, grabbed a broken piece of the wooden stool beside her, and swung. The shard sliced across the creature's cheek, and instead of blood, a thick black liquid dripped, sizzling as it hit the floor. The creature recoiled, shrieking, a sound of metal tearing. The tall shadow inside the mirror leaned forward, displeased. The glass rippled violently. Lena realized she had seconds left before the mirror pulled her in forever. The shard of stool cut through something that wasn't blood, something black and viscous that hissed when it touched the floor. The creature recoiled, its laugh a metallic rasp that made the room shiver. Lena didn't hesitate. She scrambled backward, dragging the broken wood with her like a makeshift weapon, and shoved it into the creature's chest where her blow had opened that dark seam. The thing shrieked, a sound that was at once her voice and not her voice, and it stumbled, unsteady. But the mirror didn't care for wounds the way living things did. The crack on the glass widened, and from the spiderweb fissures another fingertip emerged, then an elbow, then the suggestion of a shoulder. The surface behaved like water, stretching, rippling, seeking more surface to cross. Lena felt the pull at her bones, a tug at her memories. Flashes of childhood, the scent of her mother's kitchen, a name she'd seldom said aloud. Each vanished into the cool sheen of the mirror as if being siphoned away. Her camera lay between them, its red recording light blinking steadily. Instinct made her lurch for it, not to film but to use it. She angled the lens toward the glass and hit record. The creature paused as if it noticed the tiny red dot. For a heartbeat, its eyes narrowed with curiosity. Then, in a movement both graceful and grotesque, it mimicked her, lifting its head to stare into the camera lens exactly as she watched it. Lena spoke aloud, almost pleadingly. "You can't have me. But a cold voice, layered over her words, said through the creature, "We were waiting. You belong." The mirror's surface pulsed, and Lena realized that every second it observed, it learned a fraction more of her. She had to buy time. The recorded light continued blinking, and for now, the creature recoiled, uncertain. Lena crawled, dragging herself toward the doorway as the creature pressed forward in jerking, puppet-like spasms. Its face, her face, tilted in angles that made her stomach flip. She grabbed the camera with both hands and held it like a talisman. Its lens pointed at the creature as if a device could hold the thing at bay. The tiny microphone picked up a wet rasp as the creature spoke, echoing back in tinny playback that made her skin crawl. Something else moved behind the glass. The tall shadow, always just beyond the reflective field, shimmered, elongating its limbs toward the surface. It placed both hands on the mirror from the inside and began to push outward. The mirror bowed under its pressure, and for the first time Lena saw movement not as two-dimensional but as depth folding into the room. Faces swam behind the surface. Past victims, maybe. Eyes pleading, mouths forming words that melted like frost. Desperation edged into her thoughts. She remembered an old superstition her grandmother once muttered. Light and contrast could confuse a spirit used to smooth reflections. Lena toggled the camera's flash. The bulb flared white, bright enough to sear her vision. In that instant of blinding light, the creature recoiled, its hands slapping the glass in pain. The tall shadow staggered, its outline trembling. Using the flash's heartbeat as cover, Lena lunged, shoulder first, into the threshold. She ripped her palm along the edge of the mirror frame, feeling a burn that wasn't purely physical, like cold fire. The mirror's surface quivered, and for a breath, the creature's smile faltered. The crack spread like a wound as Lena yanked at the frame. Behind the glass, the tall figure slammed its palms against the inside, pounding, as if to force its hand through. The mirror's edges screamed in a sound that was half glass, half wind. Lena's fingers bled where splinters caught her, and the pain cut through the terror with a jagged, grounding clarity. Then the mirror bled back. Thin black threads, like the viscous ooze from earlier, seeped through the widening fissure and splattered across the floorboards. They hissed where they landed, smoking for a heartbeat, then congealed into shapes. Hands, faces, mouths opening in silent accusation. The tall shadow's voice rolled under them, a distant drumbeat that made the floor vibrate. "Return what is owed." Lena grabbed the camera strap and wrapped it around her wrist. The device felt heavier now, like a tether to something outside the mirror's hunger. She spoke into it, not for an audience but to anchor herself. She said her full name, the way her mother used to call her, the names that belonged to her life. She listed birthdays, places, the color of her first bicycle. As she spoke, a strange warmth returned to her memory. Small, safe details that resisted slipping away. The creature reared, furious at the retrieval of those tokens. The tall figure reached into the mirror and tried to snatch the parts of her that remained bright, the stolen memories. Lena tightened her grip, and the camera's red light blinked faster. Her voice steadied. For every detail she reclaimed aloud, the mirror's hold weakened a fraction. It was slow. It was terrifying. but it was work she could do. Hours must have passed, or minutes, but time felt elastic. Lena recited everything she could. The camera's recording swallowed her voice and held it as evidence. Names, songs, a secret nickname whispered only once by an old friend. The red light blinked like a heartbeat, and with every blink the glass flinched. The mirror's surface convulsed, and for a moment the tall figure retreated, unwilling to relinquish its prize. Then a new motion. The creature reached past where its body should end and touched Lena's cheek with an impossibly cold fingertip. She flinched as the memory of her father's laugh, one she had just spoken aloud, flickered and went dark. Panic surged, but she clung to the sound of her own name echoing on the camera. The recorded voice became a lifeline. A sound came from the floor above, the front door opening as if by a gust. Sunlight, weak and trembling, sliced through the window slats. The tall shadow hissed, annoyed, and the creature's hands grasped at the glass where the light cut across it. For the first time, Lena understood. Light didn't only confuse it. Sunlight burned its edges. The house had adapted to long nights of feeding, but daylight was a vulnerability. She sprinted toward the window, dragging the camera with her. The bulb had a few more flashes left. She angled the camera toward the mirror and fired the flash repeatedly. Strobe after strobe, each burst making the creature recoil, each burst stealing back a sliver of her. The tall figure screamed, a sound like furniture smashing, and the mirror convulsed violently. The surface bulged outward once, twice, then snapped back, sealing in the shadows like a wound sutured shut. When the final flash died, Lena collapsed against the floor, exhausted and trembling. The mirror lay cracked, its surface dull but intact. The tall shadow had receded, its eyes burning dimly behind the glass. She was alive but costly. Dawn crawled across the mansion like a cautious animal. Lena pushed herself to her knees and fumbled for the camera, hands slick with sweat and something darker. The recording light still blinked. She rewound in the tiny screen until she found the moment. The creature pressing its face to the glass, the tall shadow's hands pushing, her own voice steady as she spoke names. She watched herself fight and listened to the evidence of what nearly took her. Someone was coming, footsteps on the front walk, voices calling a name that made her chest lurch. Rescue? Curiosity? She couldn't be sure. Lena hauled herself to the doorway as the mansion groaned like a waking beast. The front hall felt different in daylight, less monstrous, more ashamed to show its face. She stepped outside into the pale morning air, blinking against the sudden openness. The world smelled of wet soil and freedom. A neighbor, an elderly man who kept hens, stood on the path, shouting and waving, a small radio clutched under his arm. He stared at her, then at the house, speechless. Lena staggered toward him, camera dangling, and collapsed into his arms. He asked questions. She managed to say a few disjointed words. Mirror, names, light. He wrapped his coat around her and led her away. Later, safe on the porch of the neighbor's cottage, Lena played back the footage. On the screen, for a single blink, the creature's eyes didn't look back at her. They flicked sideways toward the camera, and in the reflection of the lens, a tiny pinpoint of movement. A fingernail, pale and curved, sliding along the glass edge of the mirror. The camera's audio picked up a whisper below the wind. "We'll wait." She realized then the truth she had fought to postpone. The house had not been destroyed. It had only been delayed. And somewhere in the mansion, behind the cracked glass, something patient still watched. Lena reached the second floor, where the house finally began to reveal its true nature. The lights dimmed with every step she took, as if the walls were breathing slowly, watching her closely. The long scratches she had seen earlier were now deeper, fresh, almost bleeding. She stood in front of a closed room, and from inside came a low sound, not a whisper, but something dragging across the floor, slow and heavy. The door trembled. The wooden boards beneath her vibrated like a living heartbeat. Lena stepped back, but the floor creaked loudly. The dragging suddenly stopped, like it had just noticed her presence. Before she could react, the door creaked open on its own. A wave of icy air rushed out, chilling her skin instantly. Inside the room, there was no furniture, just an old metal bed positioned in the center. Under the bed, a dark, smoke-like stain spread outward, pulsing slightly. Against her better judgment, Lena knelt to look beneath it, and two glowing red eyes stared back at her, unblinking. She screamed and stumbled backward, but something unseen blocked her path, making her fall. The eyes stayed fixed on her, studying her every movement like a predator waiting to strike. Lena crawled away, but behind her came slow, heavy footsteps. Someone large, someone trying to stay quiet but failing. She spun around quickly, finding no one there, but a long shadow began to grow across the wall. A shadow with no source. It moved upward, lifting its head, opening a wide, unnatural mouth. It stretched over her until she felt cold breaths on the back of her neck. Panic flooded her body. Her legs refused to move, and then she heard it. A voice. "You shouldn't have come back, Lena?" Broken, distant, yet so close she felt it vibrate through her chest. She froze. That voice. It was her sister Maya's. Not similar, identical, but Maya had died 5 years ago. The shadow grew denser, taking the shape of a human figure. The familiar scent of Maya's old perfume filled the air, wrapping around Lena like a memory she wished she could forget. Tears streamed down her cheeks, a mix of terror and longing. The figure lifted its face, and for a second, Lena hoped. But the face she saw wasn't her sister's. It was twisted, half-burned, and the other half smiling with an inhuman grin. The house began to shake violently as the figure approached. Doors slammed open and shut. Windows rattled as if the house itself refused to let Lena leave. She tried crawling toward the staircase, but a cold, skeletal hand wrapped around her ankle with crushing strength. She screamed as she was dragged back across the floor. The hand solidified into burnt flesh, long blackened fingers digging into her skin. The creature leaned close to her ear and whispered, "The secrets of this house are not for the living, and you left the door open for something else to enter." The house tightened around Lena as if the walls themselves were closing in. She clawed at the wooden floor, leaving deep marks as she fought against the force dragging her backward. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out the violent rattling of the windows. Then suddenly, everything stopped. Silence fell like a thick blanket over the entire floor. The hand around her ankle vanished instantly, leaving only a burning coldness behind. Lena pushed herself up, trembling, and looked around. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretched unnaturally, like the house was rearranging itself to trap her. She heard footsteps echoing from the far end. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Something was coming toward her, and she sensed no intention other than to claim her. Her breath hitched as the lights flickered wildly, illuminating the silhouette of a figure much larger than the one she had seen earlier. It scraped its claws along the wall, carving symbols she didn't recognize but felt deep in her bones. Every instinct in her begged her to run, but her legs refused to obey. The creature stepped fully into the flickering light, revealing its towering, distorted body. Its skin looked like melted wax mixed with ash, constantly shifting and dripping onto the floor. Its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, opening from ear to ear, filled with jagged teeth that seemed carved from bone. Lena tried to scream, but only a faint breath escaped her. The creature raised one long, skeletal finger and pointed directly at her, then at the floor beneath her feet. Slowly, the wooden boards began to split apart, revealing darkness, pure, bottomless darkness. Whispering voices rose from the void below, voices calling her name in tones both pleading and furious. Lena crawled back, but the darkness followed her, spreading across the floor like a living shadow. The creature lowered itself, its face inches from hers. Its breath was cold enough to sting her eyes. "You opened the house," it growled. "So now the house opens for you." The floorboards beneath her gave a violent shudder as something unseen tried to pull her down. With a desperate surge of strength, Lena forced herself to stand and stumbled toward the stairs. The house roared around her, walls bending inward and doors slamming one after another. The creature's footsteps shook the floorboards like thunder as it chased her. She reached the top of the staircase, but the steps twisted, turning into a steep drop as if the house was trying to throw her back into the darkness. Lena grabbed the railing, her knuckles turning white, and leaped forward. She fell hard onto the lower floor, pain shooting through her legs, but she didn't stop. She crawled toward the front door, which now pulsed like a beating heart, swelling and shrinking as if alive. Behind her, the creature shrieked, a sound so sharp it felt like glass cutting through her mind. The floor began to ripple, rising and falling like waves. Lena forced herself to her feet, limping toward the door with everything she had left. Just as Lena reached out to grab the pulsating door handle, the creature appeared behind her in a violent burst of shadow. It seized her by the shoulder, its grip burning like fire. Lena shrieked and twisted her body, slamming her elbow into its face. The creature recoiled, its skin cracking like dry clay. Using the moment, Lena threw herself at the door with all her strength. The heartbeat beneath it grew faster, louder, as if the house itself panicked. The door resisted, swelling outward like it didn't want her to leave. "Let me go!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. She dug her nails into the wood and pulled. The creature lunged forward again, its claws brushing her back. At the last second, the door burst open with a deafening crack, releasing a blast of cold air that hurled her outside onto the ground. Lena tumbled across the front yard, dirt and dead leaves clinging to her skin. Behind her, the house groaned, a deep, monstrous sound as the front door slammed shut on its own. The windows flickered with dim, sickly light, almost like dozens of eyes watching her escape. Lena pushed herself up and stumbled toward the road without looking back. Her body shook violently, but she kept moving, terrified the house might reach out and pull her back in. As she reached the street, a final whisper carried on the wind. "You can't leave what you opened." She froze, her blood running cold. The house stood completely still behind her, silent, waiting. Lena realized with dread that whatever she had awakened inside House 27 wasn't finished with her. Not yet. In a dark, ancient cell within a deserted local prison, the inmate known as Prisoner 1001 had lived alone for years. Everyone knew one thing about him: his cold brutality and his ability to manipulate the fear of his victims before carrying out his crimes. He was not an ordinary killer. His cunning intelligence allowed him to study his victims meticulously, watch their movements, and choose the perfect moment to strike. The stories circulating within the prison were terrifying. Strange noises emanating from his cell at midnight, muffled screams that sent chills down the spines of other inmates. No one dared approach his cell, as if it housed a demonic mind. What made the prison authorities shudder even more was that no evidence had ever been discovered, not even the slightest trace linking him to the victims who began to vanish one by one. His first victim was a new inmate who did not know the strict rules that Prisoner 1001 had imposed upon himself. The only ransom for survival was silent obedience to the strange orders he issued every night. When this inmate failed to follow the instructions, 1001 began to perform his gruesome rituals, which no human dared to describe in detail, fearing that imagination would lead to the horrific truth. The prison had become a terrifying laboratory, where 1001 observed every movement, every whisper, and every heartbeat of potential victims. He treated pain and fear as if they were an art, weaving them meticulously with every passing moment in the cell. Even the guards working in different shifts began to feel that a dark presence consumed the air around his cell, as if pure evil had a tangible existence, wandering among the decaying walls. Over time, Prisoner 1001 became a terrifying legend among inmates, a figure seen only from a distance and spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. The missing victims struck terror into everyone's heart, leaving no trace of their existence, except for the lingering scent of fear that filled the corridors. He chose his victims carefully, often selecting those who showed any sign of weakness or confusion. One new inmate, arriving on a rainy day, immediately sensed something wrong in the air. Shadows shifted in the corners of the cell, seemingly watching him and whispering his name. He tried to ignore the feeling, but he quickly realized that every movement he made was observed, every step calculated by prisoner 1001. When he attempted to speak to a guard, there was no response, as if the entire prison was silenced under an unseen threat. The nighttime sounds grew more distinct. The creaking of old doors, muffled screams, even a faint, sharp, sudden laugh that filled the abandoned halls with dread. These long nights became a trial of the spirit, where every passing minute intensified the sense of fear, and danger crept closer gradually. 1001 moved silently, using the darkness to test his victims' reactions, leaving them with a feeling of utter helplessness before the final strike. Prisoner 1001 thrived on observation, as if fear were his daily sustenance. The victims were not merely numbers. They were part of his gruesome rituals, executed with horrifying precision. One night, he approached an inmate reading in the corner of his cell, appearing suddenly behind him without a sound. The prisoner only felt a chill envelop his body, a harsh hand gripping him tightly, followed by an oppressive silence. He began threatening his victims with terrifying words, reminding them of their past, of small mistakes they had made in life, as if every previous act led to their impending fate. It was not just physical murder. It was a complex psychological manipulation, leaving deep scars on the soul before the body finally succumbed. In one incident, an entire inmate vanished without a trace, leaving only scattered clothes and books on the floor. No one dared approach the cell to uncover the truth, as the fear of 1001 was stronger than curiosity. Anyone who came near felt an unseen gaze following every movement, as if prisoner 1001's mind extended beyond his cell, controlling every part of the surrounding environment. Darkness was his ally, used to conceal his movements and confuse his victims. He heard every whisper, every subtle sound, exploiting them to strengthen his psychological grip. The prison was no longer merely a holding facility. It had become a theater of darkness, with 1001 as the merciless director. Prisoner 1001 did not kill randomly. He meticulously planned each victim. Before striking, he would leave cryptic signs in the inmate's cell, small items signaling the impending fate. These signs ranged from handwritten messages with mysterious words to everyday objects placed in unexpected locations, reflecting his total control over the environment. One inmate who noticed these signs felt terror from the very first moment. He began hearing faint whispers from the corners, sometimes seeing them move in inexplicable ways. He tried to escape, but the doors suddenly locked, as if 1001 monitored every step before granting freedom. Hunger, isolation, and darkness were also his tools. He knew the human mind crumbles under pressure and exploited every moment of weakness to intensify the victim's sense of utter helplessness. Every movement, every glance, every sound was part of a meticulously orchestrated horror experience. Even the guards feared passing near his cell, noticing strange changes in the prison environment. Objects moving on their own, silent screams, and even a sudden, inexplicable odor. All of this made prisoner 1001 cell a zone everyone was warned to avoid. On a cold night, a new inmate arrived at prisoner 1001 cell, unaware of the legend surrounding him. He tried to adapt, but immediately felt eyes watching him from every corner. 1001 did not speak. He merely sat in the shadows, observing every movement, letting fear slowly seep into the victim's heart. The inmate began hearing soft footsteps following his every movement, and sometimes whispers coming from the walls themselves. The more he tried to ignore them, the louder the sounds grew, as if the prison itself was breathing terror, every part of it under the control of a merciless, monstrous mind. 1001 began playing with the inmate's mind, testing his endurance, presenting impossible choices. Every choice led to more fear and isolation. Every passing moment heightened the victim's sense of helplessness. It was not merely a test. It was a brutal art reflecting a clever killer's control over his victims before physically harming them. As hours passed, the inmate felt time stand still, shadows drawing closer, knowing that every wrong move could be the last. The psychological terror was stronger than any physical threat, turning the cell into a place inhabited by pure evil, with no hiding place or safety. As days passed, other inmates began to feel that prisoner 1001 was not just a killer, but an entity that consumed everything around him. The disappearance of victims became a daily occurrence, and no one dared speak of them, fearing that merely mentioning them could determine their fate. 1001 left behind strange traces. Unexplained blood, invisible wounds, and sounds emanating from the walls, as if the walls themselves were speaking terror. He did not limit himself to physical killing. He increasingly relied on controlling the mind. Each victim underwent a harrowing psychological ordeal before meeting their end. He spoke in a calm voice, yet charged with menace, reminding them of past mistakes and buried guilt, creating fear more potent than physical pain. One new guard noticed shadows moving oddly on the upper floor, despite no one being present. Every attempt to investigate ended in dizziness and terror, as if the very air had grown heavy and poisoned. Cell 1001 was the epicenter of fear, a dark force beyond comprehension. Surviving victims, if any, emerged psychologically shattered. They spoke of voices in the darkness, hands grabbing them suddenly, and the feeling that their minds were no longer their own. Even the strongest felt total helplessness before 1001. The entire prison transformed into a theater of continuous horror, where every corner, every room, could host a confrontation with prisoner 1001. Doors, walls, even the floor became instruments in the psychological game he imposed on everyone around him. Prisoner 1001 was never hasty. Every move was calculated, every victim part of a larger scheme. He employed intricate methods to terrorize his victims, from shadows and sounds to simultaneously manipulating mind and body. Each night became a performance of horror, where anyone entering his cell became part of an unforgettable, horrifying experience. One inmate attempted resistance, believing he could escape 1001's control, but the prisoner exploited his psychological weakness. He threatened him mentally, invoking terrifying dreams and deep secrets that no one had dared to know before. 1001 created a sense of total helplessness, making every misstep feel like a path to a tragic end. The cell was filled with strange symbols, old blood, and walls scratched with incomprehensible markings. Everything reflected 1001's twisted mind, with every corner harboring a hidden threat. Other inmates felt that even looking into prisoner 1001's cell could drive them insane. Even the guards suffered from sleep disturbances, hearing sounds that weren't there, feeling sudden coldness, as if 1001's control extended beyond his cell. The entire prison lived under an invisible threat, a terrifying force dominating every corner and every breath. At night, muffled screams echoed from his cell, deafening and instilling fear in everyone's heart. Each night was a survival test, each minute carrying the potential of facing death or madness under prisoner 1001's reign. Prisoner 1001 began expanding his circle of terror, targeting not only newcomers but also those who had lived in the prison for years, believing themselves safe. Anyone who tried to challenge him met a horrific fate, often sudden disappearance or psychological trauma that never healed. He knew every behavior, emotion, and fear of the inmates, using them as tools to torment before even touching them physically. 1001 also used silence as a weapon, leaving victims in complete isolation, experiencing an unbearable silence in the cell before strange sounds and whispers began, amplifying terror. Each night tested patience and psychological endurance, where every moment was laden with potential danger. One guard attempted a personal investigation but immediately felt a terrifying weight on his chest, as if the very air had become difficult to breathe. He could not approach prisoner 1001's cell more than a few steps before retreating, realizing 1001 controlled everything in the environment. He did not need conventional weapons. His mind was the deadliest weapon, controlling everyone around him without resistance. previous victims became warnings for others, evidence of 1001's terrifying control. Prisoner 1001 was not merely a killer, but an artist of terror, using every possible tool to torment his victims psychologically before physically ending them. Every movement, every sound, every shadow was carefully calculated to ignite fear. His cell became a laboratory of horror, where each victim underwent a unique psychological ordeal. Light and shadows became his instruments, creating frightening shapes on the walls, moving them silently to make victims believe malevolent spirits wandered with them. Every sound, from creaking doors to muffled whispers, was a means to intensify fear. Even food and water became part of the psychological game, using deprivation to weaken the mind, letting hunger and thirst amplify the terror. Each passing moment was a survival test, each victim's experience unique, instilling complete helplessness. Guards began hearing inexplicable sounds, shadows moving for no reason, and strange odors filling the environment. Everything pointed to a dark force beyond comprehension, dominating both mind and body. On an exceptionally dark night, a new inmate entered prisoner 1001's cell, unaware of what awaited him. Upon entering, he immediately felt the oppressive weight of terror, as if the cell walls themselves breathed evil. 1001 did not need to appear. Fear alone was enough to subdue the victim. Sounds gradually emerged. Whispers rising, creaking footsteps, all indicating that 1001 was watching mercilessly. The inmate tried to resist, only to realize that every misstep could be his last and that 1001's mind controlled everything around him. 1001 began moving slowly from the shadows, each step meticulously calculated, each glance a silent threat. The victim felt time slipping away, every second heightening a sense of complete helplessness and absolute fear. Everything in the cell became part of the horrifying performance crafted by 1001. Even the guards attempting to approach felt the same terror, as if 1001 had the ability to spread fear to anyone nearby, even outside his cell. The entire prison had become a stage for a meticulously sinister mind, where safety was non-existent, and every moment could be the last for anyone approaching. Over time, the entire prison began anticipating prisoner 1001's movements, as everything around him became saturated with fear. His cell was no longer just a confinement, but an entire world under his control. Inmates attempting to think of escape or resistance immediately felt an unseen force weighing them down, preventing any misstep. One victim, strong and accustomed to enduring pressure, gradually found himself breaking. He heard sounds from the walls of the cell, muffled screams and whispers piercing his mind, each seemingly real. 1001 observed every detail, exploiting every small fear and transforming everything into complete psychological torment. Other inmates felt terror even when merely glancing at 1001's cell. They occasionally heard muffled screams emanating from the cell and felt sudden, strange coldness. All these signs confirmed to everyone that 1001 was no ordinary human, but a dark force surrounding every corner of the prison. Sometimes, 1001 would appear suddenly in the shadows, vanishing before anyone could see him clearly. He manipulated time, creating the sensation that every minute stretched endlessly, and that fear persisted without relief. There was no safety or peace anywhere, and every misstep could be the last for any inmate or guard. Prisoner 1001 began employing new tools to terrorize his victims. No longer relying solely on shadows and sounds, he started leaving mysterious bloodstains on floors and walls, creating the feeling that death was near. Each victim would see frightening messages written in his cryptic handwriting, messages predicting their potential end, as if 1001 announced their fate before executing it. One victim tried to ignore the messages, but they seemed to move within his mind, planting guilt and fear. Every wrong move was noticed, every moment of hesitation exploited. 1001 did not need conventional weapons. His mind was the ultimate instrument of terror, controlling every sensation and emotion. Even the guards began to feel his watchful presence from afar, hearing inexplicable footsteps and whispers, sensing him in every corner. Even the bravest began to hesitate, as if fear had become tangible, consuming every part of the environment. The cell became a symbol of absolute terror. Every wall, corner, and sound pointed to 1001. Inmates lived in constant fear, as if their lives were no longer their own. 1001 controlled everything, adding a new prey to his long chain of terror each day. Each night, prisoner 1001 tested the psychological and physical limits of his victims. There was no mercy. Every movement, every word, every glance was part of his brutal game. Victims noticed that shadows moved freely, as if part of 1001's body, as if evil itself inhabited the place. One inmate tried to resist, but 1001 employed unimaginable psychological methods. He reminded him of his deepest fears, placing him before impossible choices, each leading to more torment. Other inmates felt terror merely from hearing his screams at night, as if the sound carried lethal power. The walls bore traces of blood and strange symbols representing each previous victim, reminding everyone that 1001 showed no mercy, and that any mistake could be the last. Guards feared approaching, as if he could breach the cell's boundaries and control everything around him. Most terrifyingly, 1001 did not need to touch anyone to leave his mark. Every misstep, every whisper, every sense of guilt sufficed to make the victim collapse psychologically before the horrifying end. Prisoner 1001 controlled everyone around him, even his fellow inmates. There was no place for rest or safety. Every movement in the cell was under his surveillance, and potential victims lived in constant fear. He moved silently, leaving a trail of terror in every corner he passed. One victim felt as if his mind separated from his body, and that everything around him was a nightmarish dream with no escape. Sounds, shadows, and colors were all tools of 1001, used to amplify the sense of terror. Even the guards felt constantly watched, as if 1001 controlled the entire prison. Every scream, movement, and whisper was part of the psychological game he imposed. Each night, 1001 selected a new victim, passing them through the same horrific experience, reminding everyone that he showed no mercy, and that anyone could be the next prey. Prisoner 1001 became known as the most brutal in the prison's history. His story spread even among veteran inmates who thought they had seen everything. Anyone approaching his cell felt a dark force surrounding them, as if the very air was filled with terror. 1001 used innovative methods: shadows, sounds, messages, and even invisible cues to instill fear in his victims before committing his crimes. Each night was a test of survival, every moment filled with unforgettable psychological terror. Inmates began losing track of time, living in a whirlwind of continuous fear, every minute feeling like eternity, and every misstep potentially the last. 1001 was not merely a killer, but the master of absolute terror, controlling everything around him. Prisoner 1001 had become a legendary entity within the prison. Anyone living nearby felt evil surrounding them from every corner. Victims became mere reminders of his power, and the abandoned areas around his cell bore witness to his brutal crimes. Every new victim was a horrifying experience, and 1001 tested every corner of their fear, every pang of guilt, every heartbeat. Inmates felt under the control of a merciless, monstrous mind, and every misstep could be the end. Guards no longer dared to approach, even from afar. Cell 1001 became a symbol of absolute terror, a place everyone avoided, and anyone knew that merely looking at it could change their life forever. 1001 became a living legend, an unstoppable force, indescribably brutal, a mind controlling everything around it, destroying anyone who approached. The entire prison became a psychological horror laboratory under his complete control, and each day added a new victim to his long chain of terror. Prisoner 1001 became an expert at manipulating both mind and body simultaneously. He did not merely kill. He created an entire stage of terror before taking any action. His first step was always isolation, taking the victim to a dark cell where light was minimal and shadows moved in every corner. He listened to every heartbeat, every breath, knowing exactly when fear peaked in their eyes. He would begin psychological terror, using cryptic whispers, sounds from corners, or written messages indicating their fate. This stage prolonged the experience, causing the victim to lose any sense of security, their mind gradually collapsing. Then he would exert control over the body, using strong restraints, changing positions to induce total helplessness, making every movement difficult and painful, keeping the victim under constant pressure. Next came the extreme psychological pressure, combining prolonged silence with sudden whispers, reminding the victim of past mistakes and every pang of guilt, making death feel inevitable and ensuring mind and body were completely under his control. Each victim underwent a harrowing experience where psychological fear preceded physical pain, draining them entirely. Even after the ordeal, a lasting psychological mark remained in the mind of any observer or anyone who heard the story, cementing 1001 as the ultimate symbol of terror, a merciless figure, and anyone who approached became prey to manipulation of both mind and body before the inevitable end. The way Prisoner 1001 killed inmates was part of the horrific psychological performance. It was not merely beating or disappearance. Every step was orchestrated to amplify fear. Before any physical act, he left cryptic signs in the victim's cell, written messages or small objects, warning of the impending fate, keeping the victim in a constant state of anticipation. He then imposed total isolation, sitting in the shadows, observing every movement, letting helplessness dominate the victim. He exploited every natural fear, transforming it into absolute powerlessness, making each moment of waiting a prolonged punishment. Once the mind was shattered, he applied physical pressure, using restraints, moving the victim to create a sense of total weakness, prolonging suffering before the end. 1001 relished psychological manipulation before physical pain. Every scream, every shiver, testified to his control. Even death was not just ending life. It was the culmination of a long process of psychological terror, with each victim feeling their mind being torn apart before their body. He left a permanent mark on survivors, making it more than physical killing. A deep psychological experience, leaving them in perpetual shock and amplifying the aura of terror surrounding him. Anyone aware of his stories felt that merely thinking of Cell 1001 could induce an indelible sense of fear. Prisoner 1001 began inventing new ways to torture his victims before the end, making each experience unique. He used sound and shadow to force the victim to confront their inner fears, making them believe shadows moved and sounds came from the walls themselves. He then employed restraints to restrict movement, constantly reminding them of past mistakes, guilt, and every error committed. In some cases, he left the victim for long hours in darkness, hearing mysterious sounds, kept under continuous pressure, with every part of body and mind under his control. The goal was simple: to make the victim lose all sense of safety before ending their life precisely. This method made each victim experience complete horror, with psychological pain surpassing physical pain. Every shiver, every scream was part of the brutal performance crafted by 1001, and each new victim increased his notoriety in the prison. Even survivors suffered lasting trauma, feeling that any dark place could conceal 1001, and that any misstep could be the end. Everything around him became a tool of terror. The air, walls, and floor were all under his total control. In the end, Prisoner 1001 became a living legend, the ultimate terror controlling anyone who approached. The way he killed inmates was not merely physical, but a combination of psychological and physical dominance. Each victim endured prolonged isolation, fear, and psychological torture before the physical end. He carefully selected his victims, using shadows, sounds, cryptic messages, and total isolation to create a complete experience of terror. Each victim lost any sense of safety. Every wrong step threatened their life, every breath under his control. Even after his potential death or capture, he left a legacy of fear in the prison. Any memory of his cell was enough to instill panic. 1001 was not just a killer, but a symbol of absolute control over mind and body, indescribable brutality, and a terrifying lesson for anyone daring to approach. Surviving inmates, guards who saw the shadows, and anyone who heard the stories lived in constant fear, as 1001 proved that the mind can be deadlier than any weapon and that psychological terror can outlast physical death. Thus ended the legend, but its impact remained as enduring fear, a symbol of cruelty and savagery, a person who could turn everything around him into a tool of terror, a mind without mercy, making anyone who approached an inescapable prey. At the far edge of an abandoned town stood a house marked number 27, a place no one dared to approach after a string of disappearances that began more than 30 years ago. Everyone who lived nearby knew the one rule that must never be broken. Never go near the back door, no matter what you hear. Legends claimed that the back door, made of rotting black wood, could not be opened from the outside. But from the inside, it opened on its own. Always at the same hour of the night, when the temperature suddenly dropped and the wind shifted into whisper-like voices that almost made sense. One night, a young man named Adam decided to break that rule after his friends dared him to prove the stories were nothing but old myths. He brought a small flashlight, a camera, and typed a message on his phone. 5 minutes inside. If anything happens, call the police. What Adam didn't know was that the last person who attempted the same thing had been found only through the phone he left behind on the doorstep. The phone was placed neatly in front of the back door, and the door itself was wide open, as if inviting him in. As Adam approached the house, something disturbed him deeply. A dim light in the upper window was flickering like a heartbeat. Slow at first, then faster, then stopping entirely. Worse yet, he heard footsteps inside. Heavy steps that didn't sound like one person. It felt as if something was waiting for him. Something that already knew he was coming, and knew his name. When he finally placed his hand on the rusty door handle, a wave of warmth spread through his skin despite the freezing air. Then suddenly, a whisper brushed against his ear. "Come in. We've been waiting for you." Adam pushed the back door gently, and it swung open with a slow, aching creak, as if the house itself exhaled after decades of holding its breath. The moment he stepped inside, the air changed, felt heavier, thicker, almost alive. Dust floated in the narrow beam of his flashlight, moving strangely, swirling in unnatural patterns, as though reacting to his presence. The wooden floor beneath him groaned, but the sound didn't echo like normal footsteps. Instead, it seemed to travel ahead of him, as though something unseen was walking deeper into the house, leading him. His camera light flickered, struggling to stay on. He tapped it, and for a split second, he caught a glimpse of a shadow at the end of the corridor, tall, still, and facing him. But when he lifted the camera again, the shadow was gone. A faint whisper drifted from upstairs. Not words, more like a breath forming syllables it hadn't learned yet. Adam swallowed hard but kept walking. He had promised himself not to panic. The hallway was lined with old portraits, priests, nuns, and long-forgotten families. But something was wrong with their eyes. The paint around their faces had peeled only in the eye area, exposing raw canvas beneath, making every figure appear blind, or watching him without pupils. Just as he reached the foot of the staircase, his phone vibrated violently in his pocket. A notification, but there was no signal here. He pulled out the phone. The screen showed a single message: "Don't follow the footsteps."
Adam froze.
Because he hadn't heard footsteps until now. From the top of the stairs, slow, deliberate steps began descending toward him, one by one, each louder than the last. And the worst part? There was no one on the staircase. Adam's first steps inside felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The air smelled of old paper and rain, with a metallic tang beneath it that made the back of his throat prickle. He swept the flashlight down the hallway. Doors stood half open, curtains hung like frozen ghosts, and wallpaper peeled into long strips that fluttered though there was no breeze. On a small table sat a stack of yellowed newspapers tightly bound with twine. The top headline, dated decades earlier, read, "Family of 4 vanishes from number 27. His breath hitched as he noticed childish drawings pinned to the wall near the staircase. Crayon sketches of a house with a wide, black door. One drawing had the figure of a child standing outside, a crooked smile drawn in heavy black wax. In the margin someone had written, in tiny neat letters, "He waits when the door opens from within." He followed the hallway into a parlor coated in dust. A moth-eaten armchair faced a cold fireplace. Above the mantel hung a faded portrait of a woman. Her face blurred by time, but her eyes seemed unervingly clear, as if painted with a purpose. Tucked behind the portrait was a small leather-bound journal. Adam hesitated only a second before sliding a finger under the cover and pulling it free. The handwriting inside was cramped, hurried, and smeared in places, as if written by someone who paused in terror. The first entry read, "We built the door to keep something out. It demanded a door that opens from the inside, and we obliged. Tonight the wind learned to speak our names." The next line bore a date exactly 31 years ago. A soft creak from upstairs made him freeze. The journal slipped from his hand, falling open to a page with a single sentence scrawled across it in thicker ink. "Do not let it know your name." Adam's pulse ratcheted. He flipped through more pages. The journal was a patchwork of frantic notes, sketches of the back door, and lists of names. Names crossed out, names circled. One entry explained a ritual the family had used when the voices started. They would light 3 candles at midnight, speak into the wood, and admit the house one name each night to satisfy whatever lived behind the walls. The handwriting grew sloppier with each entry, and margins were filled with desperate pleas. "No more names. It learns." He realized with cold clarity that the flickering light he'd seen in the upstairs window was not a malfunction. It was deliberate, some internal clock or signal, an indication of the hour the door would be vulnerable. The journal mapped times: 2:13, 3:07, 4:01. Times repeated across months. Each time had a scribble beside it, "Open from within." A low hum began to slip along the floorboards beneath his feet, a resonance he felt more than heard. The air around him compressed like the closing of a fist. Adam imagined the family, night after night, whispering names into the wood until their tongues grew raw. He thought of the crooked child in the drawing. He thought of the neat handwriting that warned him. He pocketed the journal and moved toward the staircase, every muscle taut. As he crested the first step, the house seemed to inhale. A breeze, warm and smelling faintly of old smoke, brushed his neck. On the landing above, a door that had been shut swung open with silent precision. The same dim light pulsed once, like an answering heartbeat. He could go. He could run back to his car, call his friends, and leave the house to whatever it held. Instead, against the itch of every survival instinct, Adam climbed. On the second landing, the corridor narrowed, and the wallpaper's floral pattern seemed to lean inward like a crowd. The temperature dropped sharply. Adam's breath fogged white. He kept his hand on the journal in his pocket as if it were an anchor. At the far end of the hall stood a small wooden door, different from the back door outside, battered but sealed with a padlock. A child's scrawl had been carved into its frame. "Do not wake the door." He took another step. From below, the back door slammed shut as if by a gust. The sound reverberated through the house, folding into itself. Adam's heart pounded. He turned to see the house's windows trap the moonlight into slits. Everything outside the panes looked flattened, like a photo left in water too long. He realized, with growing dread, that he was no longer simply inside a house. He was inside something that expected him. A soft tapping began at the small door, once, twice, measured and immovable. Then a whisper threaded through the boards, almost intelligible. "Name." Adam's mouth went dry. He understood in a flash what the journal meant. Names were the currency here. If the house asked, it wanted one to pay. He swallowed and tried to think of anything. His alias, a childhood nickname. Anything less true, anything the house might not know. The tapping increased, impatient now. The lock on the small door began to rattle as if something on the other side pulled at it. Adam stepped back, fumbling for his phone, hand shaking. It showed no signal. The battery was dwindling, and the flashlight app flickered. The house seemed to move closer still. Shadows pooled at his feet and stretched upward like fingers. He took a step toward the stairs, resolving to flee. Before he could, a voice, soft, layered with others, whispered behind him exactly one name: Adam. Every rational thought in his head shattered. The hallway blurred. The tapping stopped. The small door's lock clicked once like a verdict. Adam froze as the whispering grew into guttural murmurs. From the shadows at the end of the hallway, something moved. A shape barely visible but undeniably there. It emerged slowly, a figure cloaked in darkness, its face obscured, but long, spindly fingers reached toward him with unnatural agility. The small wooden door behind it rattled violently, as if whatever lived beyond it wanted to break free. Adam stumbled back, dropping the journal. The figure lunged. He saw its eyes, two molten spheres glowing with a red-orange intensity, staring straight into his soul. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards, and then, with terrifying speed, it surged forward. Adam barely had time to lift the flashlight. The beam caught the edges of a jagged, metallic object in its hands. A shard of wood, sharpened like a knife. He swung the flashlight at it blindly. The creature hissed, a sound like tearing cloth, and the shard slashed across the floor inches from his foot. Adam scrambled over fallen furniture, trying to reach the stairs, but the creature moved faster, closing the distance with every step. Its footsteps made no sound yet created a deep, pounding vibration through the house, echoing inside Adam's chest. He reached the base of the stairs and glanced back. The creature paused, cocking its head like a predator savoring the hunt. Its mouth opened slightly, too wide, revealing rows of uneven, sharpened teeth. Adam realized the legends were true. This thing was born from the house, a predator formed from decades of fear and blood. He leaped toward the stairs, heart hammering, the creature lunging again, and something wet and sticky brushed his arm. He didn't stop to see if it was blood, sweat, or something else. The hunt had begun, and he was the prey. Adam scrambled up the stairs two at a time, the creature snapping at his heels with impossible speed. Its claws scraped the banister, sending splinters flying like deadly shrapnel. He could feel the heat of its presence behind him, a suffocating wave of rage and hunger that seemed to warp the very air. Reaching the second-floor landing, Adam slammed into a closed door, forcing it open. He ducked inside a small study room filled with dusty books and overturned furniture. His flashlight flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. He tried to steady his breath, but the pounding footsteps were coming up the stairs faster than he could run. Through the cracked window, moonlight illuminated something terrifying. The creature's elongated shadow stretching across the landing, claws scraping the floor, and its eyes, two burning orbs that never blinked, focused solely on him. The creature's mouth opened, releasing a howl that reverberated through the house, rattling the glass. Adam stumbled over a chair, knocking over a heavy bookshelf, and the creature shrieked in fury, its clawed hands pounding the floor in frustration. Adam grabbed a heavy metal candlestick from a table and swung it with all his strength. The creature staggered but did not fall. It advanced again, faster, snapping its teeth. The room smelled of decay, iron, and something ancient, like old blood mixed with soot. Adam realized he could not outrun it. There was only one chance. He had to confront it or be consumed. Adam backed into a corner, holding the candlestick like a lifeline. The creature advanced slowly, savoring the fear it had cultivated. Its claws left deep gouges in the wooden floor, splinters embedding in Adam's shoes. He swung again, catching it across the shoulder. It hissed, a wet, gurgling sound, and lunged, knocking him to the ground. Pain shot through his leg as the creature pinned him down, its weight almost crushing. Its face hovered inches from his, molten eyes staring, teeth gnashing. Adam jabbed at its chest with the candlestick. The shard of metal dug into its dark flesh, and it screeched in pain, momentarily staggering. Adam seized the chance and rolled to his feet. The hallway seemed to twist, walls elongating and ceiling tilting. Every shadow became a weapon, reaching for him. He sprinted, adrenaline carrying him, as the creature recovered, faster now, faster than humanly possible. It swiped with a claw, grazing his arm, leaving a searing cut that burned with unnatural cold. He reached a window and tried to pry it open. The glass wouldn't budge. Behind him, the creature paused, tilting its head, as if studying its prey. Then, with inhuman speed, it vanished from the floor, reappearing directly in front of him. Adam barely had time to scream before it lunged. Adam slammed the candlestick down and grabbed a chair, swinging it as a shield. The creature roared, a mix of human and animal sounds, and lunged through the hallway, knocking over furniture with unnatural strength. Adam backed into a narrow alcove, but the creature's shadow spread across the walls like ink, reaching for him. He remembered the journal, names, rituals, warnings. Desperate, he whispered aloud, "I have no name to give." The creature froze for a fraction of a second, its eyes narrowing. That was enough for Adam to leap forward, barreling past it and diving through a door marked basement at the end of the hall. Inside, the basement was dark, filled with debris and water dripping from the ceiling. He stumbled over broken crates, splinters cutting his hands. The creature's roar echoed above him, pounding the stairs, rattling the house. Adam could hear it climbing down after him, slower this time, methodical, savoring the chase. He noticed a stack of old boards leaning against the wall and grabbed one like a spear. He held it in front of him, ready to strike. The creature appeared at the bottom of the stairs, its eyes glowing like molten fire. It hissed, circling him, claws tapping against the concrete floor. Adam swung the board with every ounce of strength. The creature hissed, staggered, and Adam realized that he might actually have a chance to fight back. For the first time since entering the house, Adam felt something he hadn't felt before: control. But he knew it was temporary. The creature would not stop. It had only one purpose: to consume him. Adam braced himself. The creature's eyes bore into him like molten lava. It hissed, lunging forward, and Adam thrust the board with all his might. The impact sent a shockwave through his arms. The creature stumbled but recovered immediately, claws scraping the concrete. He ran deeper into the basement, slipping in the water and debris, but the creature followed, relentless. It didn't just hunt with speed. It anticipated his every move, predicting his turns, his stops, his breath. Its growls echoed from every corner, as if the house itself had become a living trap. Suddenly, Adam tripped over a hidden staircase descending further into darkness. He fell hard, the board sliding from his hands. The creature appeared above him, towering, red eyes burning brighter than ever. Its claws slashed the wall inches from him, sending sparks from stone and wood. Desperation surged. Adam grabbed a jagged pipe from the ground. He jabbed, swung, and hammered with all his strength. The creature recoiled slightly, but its fury was unmatched. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, teeth gleaming like razors. Adam realized the house had trained it for this, feeding it decades of fear, pain, and blood. Then a scream split the basement. Adam's own voice, echoing and twisted, as the creature pressed closer. Shadows danced, forming faces of past victims in the flickering light. Adam's heart pounded, and he understood. The house didn't just want him alive. It wanted to break him entirely before consuming him. The chase had reached its crescendo. Blood, fear, and darkness converged. Adam had to survive, or number 27 would claim another soul, adding to its centuries of terror. Adam's lungs burned as he stumbled deeper into the basement. Water pooled around his feet, reflecting the flickering shadows of the creature. Its growls had shifted, closer now, almost whispering directly into his skull. He realized that the house was not just a building. It was a predator that used the creature as its instrument. Every creak, every shift of air, every flicker of light was a deliberate maneuver designed to trap him. He noticed a narrow corridor at the far end, partially blocked by old crates. Without thinking, Adam darted through it. The space seemed to close behind him, walls pressing in. A foul stench hit him. Decay, rust, and something far older, like the scent of every victim who had ever crossed the house's threshold. His hands scraped the walls as he ran, leaving streaks of blood where the creature had nicked him moments ago. Suddenly, he tripped over something soft. Looking down, he realized it was a human hand, pale and rigid, protruding from the water. Panic surged through him as he recognized the familiar rings and bracelets. Previous victims. The realization hit. He was not the first to be hunted, and he might not be the last. Behind him, the creature's hiss became louder, sharper. He could see the outline of its body emerging from the darkness. Tall, twisted, a nightmare-given form. Its head cocked slightly, tilting as it studied him like a predator admiring its prey. Adam's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed to run, but the basement twisted endlessly, a labyrinth designed by the house itself. He took a deep breath, steadied his trembling hands, and gripped a broken pipe. This was no longer about escape. It was about survival. He had to fight, or number 27 would claim another soul tonight. Adam raised the pipe, ready to strike. The creature approached silently, its molten eyes fixed, claws scraping along the concrete. It circled him like a shark, waiting for the right moment. Adam swung the pipe, connecting with its arm. The creature shrieked, a horrid sound that echoed and twisted the air around him. It lunged again. Adam dodged, rolling across puddles of water, but the creature's speed was supernatural. Its shadow stretched across the walls, forming grotesque shapes, hands that seemed to reach out of reality itself. Adam's mind raced. He remembered the journal's warnings about naming it, about the ritual of doors. Perhaps there was a way to trap it, to trick the house. His eyes caught a stack of old, rotting doors leaning against the wall. An idea struck him. He sprinted toward the pile, dragging a heavy door behind him. The creature lunged again, snapping its teeth inches from his face. Adam swung the door like a battering ram, hitting it directly. The impact sent the creature stumbling backward into a stack of crates, shattering them with a deafening crash. For a moment, the basement was silent, except for Adam's ragged breathing. The creature rose, furious, shaking the debris off. Adam knew this was temporary. The house had trained it for centuries. It would adapt and it would hunt him again. He grabbed another broken board and prepared for the next strike. Every muscle in his body screamed. He was not running anymore. He was fighting for life, fighting against a predator older than any memory, older than fear itself. Adam backed further into the corner of the basement, breathing heavily. The creature advanced, slower this time, but its eyes burned like molten coals, and its claws carved the concrete floor with each step. Adam realized the house itself was feeding it energy, drawing from fear, from his desperation. Every heartbeat of his fueled its rage. He remembered something from the journal, something about mirrors and reflections. Perhaps the house could be tricked, trapped through its own obsession with sight. Adam scanned the basement quickly and spotted a large, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. A plan formed in his mind. He dragged it into the center of the floor, angling it so that the creature would see its own reflection. The creature stopped, head tilting as it stared. It hissed, a shrill, piercing sound. Adam swung the pipe with all his might, smashing the mirror. Glass shattered, sending sharp fragments everywhere. The creature recoiled, howling in pain, blinded temporarily by its reflection. Adam took the opportunity and ran toward a narrow staircase at the far end, still carrying the pipe as a weapon. Behind him, he could hear the creature recovering, its fury returning even stronger. Adam knew that the house itself would not allow him to leave easily. Every door, every shadow, every corner was a potential trap. He had to reach the main exit or become just another part of number 27's gruesome history. Adam ran with desperate speed, ignoring the pain in his cuts, ignoring the splintered wood and water. The creature's growls echoed louder, shaking the very foundation of the house. He could feel it anticipating his every move, waiting to strike at the perfect moment. Adam reached a door leading to the front of the house, his heart hammering in his chest. The creature was relentless, climbing the basement stairs behind him. The house seemed alive, walls stretching, shadows shifting, trapping him within its labyrinthine corridors. He swung the broken pipe wildly as he ran, hoping to fend it off even momentarily. He could see the faint glow of moonlight spilling through the front windows. Freedom was close, but the house was not done. Doors slammed shut in the distance, windows rattled violently, and the floor beneath him seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The creature's shadow followed him relentlessly, growing larger with every step. Adam turned a corner, finding a narrow hallway lined with portraits of former residents. Their eyes seemed to track him, their faces twisted in silent screams. He realized the house had absorbed them, storing their fear and rage. The creature moved through the shadows, a blur of claws and teeth. Adam swung the pipe again, catching it on the shoulder. It screeched, blood spraying from a gash in its arm. He ran faster, ignoring the sting of his injuries. The front door was just ahead, but as he reached for the handle, the creature appeared directly behind him, its hot breath on his neck. It lunged, but Adam rolled, sliding through the door just in time. He slammed it shut, bolting it with all his might. Adam collapsed against the door, gasping. Outside, the moonlight felt like salvation. But he knew, deep in his bones, that number 27 was not finished. Its hunger would never be sated, and it would always be waiting. Adam leaned against the front door, trembling, covered in cuts and bruises. The moonlight bathed him in cold silver, and for the first time since entering number 27, he felt the air outside. The house was silent now, but Adam knew better than to trust the calm. The windows glimmered with shadows. The faintest creak might signal the creature's return. He looked back at the dark structure. Number 27 loomed like a monstrous silhouette, its windows' empty eyes staring back. The house had claimed many before him, and it would claim more. He felt the weight of the journal in his pocket, a reminder that knowledge was survival. He had learned the rituals, the doors, the cost of names. Adam limped toward the street, heart racing, every sound of the wind, every flicker of shadow keeping him alert. He knew that once a house like 27 had marked you, its hunger never left. Even if he survived tonight, its presence would haunt him forever. A sudden movement in the corner of his eye made him freeze. For a brief second, he swore he saw the creature's glowing eyes watching from an upstairs window. The house had let him go, for now. But its patience was infinite, and its hunger eternal. Adam reached the street, gulping fresh air. He had survived, but number 27 had left its mark. Not just on his body, but on his mind. He knew deep down that someday he would be forced to return. Days passed, but Adam could not shake the images from his mind. The house haunted his dreams, dark corridors twisting endlessly, the creature's glowing eyes staring at him from every corner. He woke in cold sweats, hands trembling, expecting to see the figure lurking in the shadows of his room. He avoided going near anything resembling a door, afraid of triggering a ritual he didn't fully understand. The journal lay open on his desk, pages marked with blood and notes about doors, names, and rituals. Adam realized that number 27 was more than a physical place. It was a living entity, feeding off fear, rage, and death. Each victim strengthened it, and each scream was like fuel to its hunger. Despite his trauma, Adam felt a grim resolve forming. He had survived the house once, and perhaps he could survive it again. He began researching, marking patterns, trying to understand its cycles, its weaknesses. The journal had given him clues, but nothing guaranteed safety. Every creak of a floorboard, every flicker of shadow, sent shivers down his spine. One night, he saw the creature in a dream, its claws reaching out, dragging him back into the darkness of number 27. He awoke with a start, realizing it was not just a nightmare. Its presence lingered in the real world, and the house was patient. Could wait. It always waited. Adam knew he had to prepare. The house was eternal, the creature relentless, and its hunger infinite. The next encounter would not be a chase. It would be a fight for life, for soul, for sanity itself. Weeks turned into months. Adam had fortified his apartment with wards and symbols from the journal, creating barriers he hoped could delay number 27. He barely slept, barely ate, consumed by the obsession of staying alive and understanding the creature's patterns. Every shadow was suspect, every creak a potential ambush. One stormy night, the power went out. Adam's heart raced. Lightning illuminated the dark corners of his apartment, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the creature's glowing eyes staring through his window. It had found him. Panic surged, but he forced himself to recall the ritual described in the journal. Words were whispered, symbols drawn in haste on the floor. The creature pressed closer, hissing, claws scraping the walls. Adam held his ground, chanting the words, focusing every ounce of fear into defiance. The creature shrieked and recoiled as the wards flared with an unnatural light. For a brief moment, it seemed to vanish, leaving the apartment silent except for the storm outside. Adam collapsed, exhausted but alive. He knew it was only temporary. Number 27 never forgot, never forgave. But he had learned that preparation, knowledge, and courage could stave off the inevitable, if only for a while. The creature's hunger was infinite, but Adam's resolve was growing, sharpened by the fear that had once almost consumed him entirely. Outside, the storm raged, lightning striking like the claws of the house reaching through reality. Adam's battle had become more than survival. It was war, a war of mind, body, and soul against an ancient predator that thrived on terror itself. Adam began documenting everything meticulously. Each encounter, each sighting, each subtle change in shadows or temperature was recorded. He understood that knowledge could be his only weapon against number 27. The house adapted constantly, learning from fear and panic, but he hoped that careful observation could reveal patterns, weaknesses, openings. One evening, as he examined a corner of his apartment, a strange vibration ran through the floorboards. His pulse quickened. He glimpsed movement at the edge of his vision. Claws scraping against the walls, a low hiss echoing. The creature was probing, testing his defenses. Adam's hands shook, but he stood firm, drawing more symbols, whispering chants to fortify the wards. The creature pressed forward, its eyes glowing brighter, filling the room with a sense of suffocating heat. It lunged, striking the floor with claws, creating splinters that flew like shards of glass. Adam reacted instinctively, swinging the heaviest board he could find. The impact sent the creature staggering back, screeching in pain, but it quickly recovered, its rage intensifying. Adam realized that number 27 was not merely a place. It was sentient, feeding on terror, constantly testing its prey, learning, evolving. He had survived longer than most, but the house's patience was infinite. Its hunt was never-ending, and the creature's hunger had only grown sharper since his first encounter. Adam braced himself. Every strike, every symbol, every whispered word mattered. He understood now that survival was a battle of endurance, intelligence, and courage. A constant war against an ancient entity that thrived on fear, pain, and death. Adam's life became a series of routines and precautions. He avoided nightfall, reinforced windows, and set alarms. But the house was patient. One evening, as lightning split the sky, Adam noticed a shadow flicker in the corner. His stomach dropped. The creature had returned, testing his limits. It emerged silently from the darkness, its claws leaving grooves in the floor. Its eyes glowed hotter, burning through the faint light. Adam raised his pipe, ready to strike, but the creature moved with inhuman grace, almost anticipating his actions. He swung, missed, and felt the cold scratch of its claw across his shoulder. Pain surged, but he didn't falter. Adam chanted faster, drawing protective symbols. The creature screeched, reared, and slammed its claws into the wall, splintering wood and concrete. The room vibrated with its rage, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. He realized the house itself was angry, its creation, its predator, being challenged by a human. In that instant, Adam felt something unexpected. Clarity. He understood the house's obsession with doors, thresholds, and fear. Each opening was a portal, each shadow a reflection of terror. With precision, he manipulated the wards, creating a temporary barrier between him and the creature. It recoiled, hissing, its molten eyes burning with frustration. Adam knew he could not rest. Number 27 would wait, always, and its hunger would never cease. But he also knew he had learned, adapted, and survived. The fight was far from over, but he was no longer defenseless. The creature may have strength, but Adam had cunning, preparation, and the will to survive. The final night arrived. Adam stood before the front door of number 27, heart pounding, rain lashing against the windows. He had fortified the barriers, prepared the wards, and memorized every ritual in the journal. Tonight, he would face the creature one last time. The door creaked open, and the house seemed to exhale. Shadows lengthened, twisting like serpents. The creature emerged, taller, angrier, molten eyes burning with centuries of hunger. Adam raised his weapons, heart racing, mind sharp. The fight was inevitable. Steel met claw, wood splintered, and the creature shrieked in rage. Adam moved with precision, striking weak points, chanting protective spells, forcing the creature backward. Every step, every strike was calculated. The creature's strength was immense, but Adam's cunning kept him alive. Lightning illuminated the basement as the creature lunged again, its molten gaze piercing through Adam's soul. He struck the final blow, a perfectly aimed pipe through its chest. The creature let out a deafening howl, staggering backward, then vanished into the shadows. The house trembled, as if mourning its lost predator, but the wards held. Adam collapsed, soaked, exhausted, and victorious. Number 27 remained, looming ominously, but its terror had been challenged. He knew the house would never forget him, but he had survived. For now, the creature was banished, the house contained, and Adam had proven that even ancient terror could be resisted. The legend of number 27 continued, but a survivor walked free, bearing the scars and the knowledge of the house's eternal hunger. Adam had faced the nightmare and lived,